I'm the mayor, Roger Schlegel. That's at 7:30. I live at 7401 Maple Avenue. It's predominantly from people from the Penn neighborhood. It's sponsored by the old Tacoma Old Town Residents Association, but anyone, of course, could stop by. The second thing I just wanted to reiterate that this is a message that went out from the chief of police today, that there was an incident last night, and there was a lot of rumors flying around about an incident on Maple Avenue, and the rumors were not helped by a overzealous television reporter who was suggesting something had happened that hadn't happened. And I just want to reiterate that there was not a crime that happened that anyone should be worried about. It isn't connected to any of the other, the incident wasn't connected in any way to any of the other unfortunate violent crimes that happened in the community recently. So I just want to make sure that people are aware of that. And there's nothing to worry about in that case. And the chief and his department are investigating the incident, but it was not a violent crime.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor. I also have two things. I wanted to thank the Tacoma Boys newspaper for hosting the candidates forum last night. I thought it was very nice, and I'm sure the community found it informative to hear the candidates and what they stand for. Then I wanted to ask Ms. Matthews, I noticed that there's a company that is posting signs on telephone poles and bus stops for looking for to haul away cars. And I wonder if there's any way we can go after them for vandalism or destruction of property, since they're using a glue that is unremovable.
Certainly, what we typically do is the code enforcement staff will try to make contact with the company that is doing that and pursue that matter through the code, the property maintenance code and the city code.
Thank you.
We'll follow up on it.
Councilmember Clay, did you have something?
Yeah. Just to follow up on what Councilmember Seaman said, I think we've talked about a couple things about this before. One, I used to work in Costa Mesa, California. They had an anti-flyering ordinance. And if you put out flyers or posted signs, they'd bill you for the cleanup. And I don't know if we can do that here or not, but it stopped people pretty dead in their tracks when they implemented that, which was nice. And the other thing is, we talked at one time too about, we were talking about the sign ordinance pieces, about actually getting an MOU with the utility company. Pepco, I guess, owns the utility poles, so that like I noticed that we have signs posted on their utility poles. Some of our I don't know, directional signs, some of them, and maybe some of the wayfinding signs even. But there's some places where we have things posted on the utility poles. I think we should have a MOU with them both, so that where it's appropriate, we could use the signs for the poles for official city signage, but also so that we could deal with the other postings and the kind of litter that's generated from that. The other thing I wanted to say was just to remind folks that the Ward 2 Halloween party is at my house on Friday at 5 o'clock. Its official end time is 8, although it usually goes later than that. And we're going to have a haunted house, and it's a potluck, lots of fun. So you can come in costume or come as you are. And just wanted to extend an invitation out to the Ward 2 folks, and also to the staff if they would like to come. You're certainly welcome to come. I've invited all the council members. So.
Anybody else? And I'll just comment that on Councilmember Clay's Halloween party, I plan on attending, and I plan on attending
This is the special guest.
as an off-leash dog. I just wanted to put out there that there have been a number of people who are questioning the operation of the 911 system in Tacoma Park, and an item came up recently that I thought had been addressed a number of years ago with testing in various areas, but it was about 911 calls from landlines in the former Prince George's section of the city going to the wrong 911 center. I believe that we heard that if there were any problems, they had been straightened out, but that issue has cropped up again, and so it would be helpful to get any information on that, or if anybody needs information on who is having problems, be happy to pass that along.
People can pass along the phone numbers that are affected, we can track it down.
Okay. And there was also a question about 911 calls not going directly to the Tacoma Park Police Department. And my thought was that it's not supposed to do that, that there's a 911 call center, and they go there and they route to whichever police department or fire, EMS, whoever is supposed to respond, it goes to there, that no one should expect that if they call 911, a Tacoma Park Police dispatcher will pick up the phone.
You are correct. If they want to call directly, the 301-270-1100 goes right to our dispatch center. And if you want, that is a direct way to call them. We tell people they can either call 911 or they can call that number, which is our direct line into dispatch. The incident that I was aware of, and I think the manager was aware of, there was a couple people that had called 911 and were a little upset that they got redirected back. That's a standard practice. That's the way the system's set up, and that will not change. As for the Prince George's County, I was under the impression the only problem that it still exists, and that's nothing that we can control, is the cell phone. So if there is a person that is in the old Prince George's, which is now obviously Montgomery County, I need to know their phone number, and we can work on that right away. But cell phones, there still is an issue, and that's because of the carriers and the system they're doing. We can't fix that. And I know it's been a problem because Colleen and me discussed it my first month here, and it's still an issue today. Not all the companies have got on board so they'll transfer correctly. But if a person has an emergency for fire or ambulance, you need to call 911. If it's for police, you can call us directly, and we will dispatch it. That it does make it a quicker dispatch if you call us directly.
And what's that number?
301-270-1100.
Thank you.
I just had a follow-up question. That's no different than if you were a Montgomery County resident, though, because if you call in your Montgomery County, you still go to this dispatcher that decides whether you should go to the police 911 or the fire and rescue, or...
Actually, when you call 911, they'll go police or fire. And then it goes to a second person who takes the call. In other words, the call taker in police or the call taker in fire, which is two different sections up in the Emergency Operations Center. And then when they get the call and see that the address is Tacoma Park, they'll automatically hit the switch, and they'll switch it right to Tacoma Park. And on a direct line that they have at their console, it comes right to our dispatcher, and we pick it up. Now, do you lose a few minutes or seconds in it? Yes, you can. So if it's an emergency, you want to get right away to the Tacoma Park Police, 301-270-1100.
When I was a kid, we had stickers that we put on our phone that had the phone, this was before they had the 911 system in Brea, that had the phone number for the police and the fire department. Why don't we make stickers out for this? This is a recurring issue. And if people are concerned about it, they could put the stickers on. I mean,
I can look at
it
that.
used to be we had one phone in our house and every kid got one sticker. In fact, it was police department officer Michael Chang used to come. He was a community policing officer, come and educate the kids on how to make the calls and give out the stickers. We'd need more stickers than that. Now I have like 6 phones in my
We'll
house.
look into it.
Stickers are cheap.
Thank you. Any other council comments? Okay, then we'll move along to the next item, and that is that I want to note for the record a proclamation commending the Tacoma Park Lions Club on its 80th anniversary. They are going to have an event, and I will take this proclamation to them for that event and recognize their service to the community for 80 years. We don't have any minutes to adopt, so the next item is additional agenda items and agenda scheduling update. I want to note 2 changes to tonight's agenda. If everybody can note that consent agenda item 4B, the resolution approving the amendment to the land lease agreement with the co-op, has been pulled on request by Councilmember Clay, and the folks from MHP are here, and to accommodate their getting out of here at a reasonable hour, we've moved agenda item 7, which is the discussion of their request to extend the term of the pilot on 8508 and 8510 Flower Avenue. We have moved that to the first work session item after the consent agenda. So people can note that on your agendas. And I'll also note that this is the last substantive meeting of this council. The election is next Tuesday, November 3rd, so there will not be a meeting Monday, November 2nd. The council will come back on, I believe, Wednesday, the 4th, and confirm the election results. Then there's planned to be a separate meeting that isn't a council meeting, hopefully with the Montgomery County School System, about Tacoma Park Elementary. It's likely to happen or not likely to happen?
I'm not sure, we've been going back and forth, and I'm not sure if the date will work.
Okay, we're not sure that's going to happen, but we're trying to make that happen on the 9th. And then the next meeting is November 16th, and that's the transition meeting from the old council to the new council. So the next substantive meeting of the city council will be the new council on November 23rd. We've now reached the point in the agenda for public comment period. If there's anybody who'd like to comment on anything not on the agenda or anything that's on our work session agenda, now's your chance to do so. Please identify yourself and please keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Yep, my name's Pat Lovewood, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Ward 4. Yep, I want to tell you guys what a great job Eric Bond with the Tacoma Voice did on that forum last night. You know, I wasn't feeling that great, but I sure as heck did not want to miss that forum. And it was great, and they all put on a very informative description of themselves and what they're planning on doing, and a couple of things came up is I hope people realize that have made a point about the non-citizens' ability to vote in Tacoma Park. You know, because some people think that just because they are not citizens, they can't vote. But I believe we are a sanctuary city, and we do allow the people to vote. And also, again, the question came up about if you're a felon who's already served his time, got out of the penitentiary, and trying to make a better life for himself and already paid his debt, doesn't he have a right to vote still? I hope so, because that is punishment above and beyond, you know, and at that point I consider that cruelty if they're not allowed to vote. And I think if you served your time and you've done you've paid your debt, they should be able to get out there and vote. And also, people need to know that if they want to serve our city and they want to be thankful for the services we've already given them, then they can at least come out and vote. It's not that hard. If I can do it, they can do it. And also, somebody was asking me, what do you do to become a write-in candidate or a regular candidate, and what is the advantage of one over the other? You know, and because it came up a couple of times, and it came up again when I was on the way out tonight, that somebody went from a regular candidate to a write-in candidate, and what's the advantage of that? You know, I know a lot about voting. It might get people's hands exercising, and that's about all I can think of, but other than that, I don't know. I'd have a hard time writing in, period. But anyway, just wanted to let you know that I really appreciated the forum last night, and I'm looking forward to any other events. Also, please post it for the children of our city, any Halloween parties going on around the city, and please stress to them and ask the chief of police to keep an eye on any children who are not being supervised by an adult, because I don't want to see anything happen. I got sick the other night, and I've been sick for days because of that little girl, Miss Thompson, that was found in a landfill last Wednesday night. They found her in a landfill, dead. And that really, she's only 7 years old, and that tore me up. And I don't want to ever see that happen in my city. And I want to ask the chief of police to please monitor it and monitor the Halloween, and ask everybody, keep their eyes on their kids and don't leave them alone for a minute, either at a party or at an event or a demonstration or anything. Don't leave their kids alone. Thank you for letting me share. And remember, everybody, Get out there and vote. V-O-T-E. If I can do it, you can do it. And I hope we see a lot of people from the Franklin out there. Yeah.
Mr. Lovelace, I believe in the state of Maryland that convicted people who have served their debt to society are able to vote.
They are?
They are eligible to vote, yes.
Okay, well, we're going to let people know that. Because people don't think they can vote after they've been in jail. And I think, that if they've done their time in the penitentiary, and they've already done, they should be able to vote.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But we got to get the word out that we need everybody's vote.
Thanks for your comments.
Hi, I'm Chuck Thomas, outgoing chair of the Public Safety Citizen Advisory Committee, and I was calling to comment on that agenda item scheduled for your work session. Last time I spoke here about the police chief's new committee. I was pleased that there was talk during your council meeting about there being, having that as well as keeping the safety committee. Subsequently, after discussing the matter further with you, the mayor and the council member Siemens, in giving it a lot more thought, what made sense to me was the idea that you had suggested that since among those who seem to be leaning towards wanting to keep the committee, there's still a lot of different ideas about how it should be structured and function in the mission and so forth, and that with little time left in this session, that what would make more sense would be to have a temporary hiatus or a suspension of the operation of the committee to give the council time to really make it into something that will really serve well. And so I just wanted to express my support for that and my offer to, even as my term expires, to, be involved in helping with any suggestions for how to make it, what the language should be that would be most helpful of it fulfilling its mission of being a legislative advisory body, because I do still feel strongly that after enough time to really formulate it, that it is important for the city council to have an independent advisory body on public safety and crime policy matters in addition to the chief's committee. So in the interim, I spoke about it with the other members of the committee, the remaining members, and one of the applicants who's been very involved, and they all concurred that would be a good idea too. As a result, Aaron, one of the members still hasn't reapplied, so I'm offering to help with a smooth transition by withdrawing my application for reappointment. And Terrell North said that he would additionally prefer the opportunity, instead of remaining an applicant, to apply to serve on the Chiefs Committee. And the other two members, Aaron and Dave, offered to do so as well. So I wanted to strongly support their, recommend that they would be very helpful assets to the Chiefs team. As for myself, other than helping out with the anything you need help with on the language to reformulate the committee, I'll be taking the opportunity to figure out how I want to balance my various volunteer efforts, including on the city level. So I thank you for this opportunity to serve for the past 3 years, and thank all of you for your service to the city. Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Borden, a member of the Public Safety Citizens Advisory Committee, have been for close to 2 years. Now I think we're talking about the Safety Committee and its future, because there have been problems that we've dealt with, in particular a rather painful conflict which occurred during the first part of my membership on the committee. I regret I was unable to attend the previous 2 meetings where this was discussed because of other obligations. I did watch most of the footage of those meetings online. My initial reaction was that I agree with the idea of narrowing the focus of the committee's stated mission. And I think that's a good idea. But at first, at least, I did not see that as being the heart of the problems that we faced, which I saw related to the conflict, and which in turn related, I felt, to particular personality dynamics that were going on that are unlikely to resurface, although they could reoccur in any committee, presumably. Since then, I've spent some time thinking about it, and I believe that the broad focus of the committee's stated mission did in fact set the stage for this conflict very much. There were actually 3 different visions at work on our committee all at once, some of them held by the same people in some cases. One vision or hope was, as Chuck has described, and I'm part of that, a group that would advise the City Council on matters of policy, in most cases directed by requests from the Council, in some cases directed by what we perceive as important or that members of the community do. The second idea, concept was of the committee as a source of people to help volunteers, support the police, et cetera, carry out projects. Andy Kellerman, our former chairman, would have been the leading exponent of that. Andy actually went so far as to deny the appropriateness of the committee making recommendations on policy, despite what I saw in the language as, and our name, advisory committee, as giving us potentially a role to play in that. Now, the third objective at work was one that really wasn't talked about that much, but it came up in individual conversations, which is one or more professionals on the committee who saw it as a vehicle to enable them to forge a relationship with the Tacoma Park Police, particularly with the chief, and to have an influence on policy through that route. I was in Mike Israel, in particular, after our conflict blew up, which there isn't time to go into today. I received a very angry email from him stating that that whole idea was that the door was slammed shut now, or he believed it would be. I'm not sure why he believed that. And my view was our mission is to advise the council in any case. And so I believe there is a good reason to focus the mission. I share Chuck's view that it should be a policy advisory mission. And did that beat me and I'm out of time? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll leave it at that.
Thanks for your comments. Anybody else wish to comment at public comment? Okay, thank you all. And we'll move along to the city manager's comments.
As I did last week, I'd like to use my time on the agenda to have the chief address some of the crime incidents that have happened in the community.
Good evening. I wanted to bring you all an update on what we've been doing since last week and what's been happening in the community. The good news is we've had no robberies this week. Our detail's been in full strength for the last 5 nights. We've had only 1 car broken into, and it occurred on Maple Avenue in one of the back apartment parking lots, which is outside of what I call the target area where we've been looking for the suspects. We did arrest 1 suspect last week who had stolen property. Unfortunately, he had stolen it in Prince George's County, and we caught him as he came into the city. At the exact same moment that we were arresting him, there was break-ins going down in Josh's ward, in Ward 1, where we had like 4 or 5 cars hit within a 10-minute period. In that case, I once again will emphasize to our residents, when you see something, don't go outside and investigate or try to chase. Please call us, because we think if we'd have got the call, we may have got there in time to pick up this suspect who was breaking into cars. So please call us, once again, 301-270-1100. Please call, and we can get our officers out. We did get photos of the 3 suspects in the robbery and stabbing, which had occurred 2 weeks ago. There was some concerns about the quality of the picture when it first came out. We put it out as fast as we get it. Working with the TV stations, we were able to get it out over the television, and it was much more enhanced. We have been following leads, but most of our leads have now went dead, as we call it, and we're going to be hitting D.C. area tomorrow on the high schools and the schools that surround the metro station. Suspects we traced the suspects to a go-go dance that occurred in D.C. right on the line, right by the metro station that night. Several of our residents had observed it, and we were able to figure that out, and then we went to the 7-Eleven, and we do have the pictures of the 7-Eleven. Are our 3 suspects. Fortunately, our victim in this case cannot identify because of the time of night and what had occurred. So we're still working that one. We have photos of 2 suspects from the larcenies that occurred throughout the city, which we got their pictures. We've enhanced them, and I've looked at them from when we originally got them. They're pretty good pictures. We're still trying to identify them, working with D.C. and Montgomery County to see if anyone can identify them. It's a slow, arduous process, but we're working on it. We've got 2 detectives doing that full time. When we get the pictures, we try to put them out as fast as possible. We work to enhance them, as I said earlier. That's a process that sometimes takes several days working with the TV stations. We don't have that equipment, but we think we have good pictures out now. Halloween is Saturday night. We will have 2 shifts on the road working. I will personally be out supervising. Our kids is our big concern, and I know with the robberies and the thefts that there's a lot of concern in the community. I want to reassure the public that we will be out in force, making sure it's a safe night for our kids, as it always has been in Tacoma Park. And like the previous speaker, it's very important to me that our kids are safe out there. We urge the parents to be with their kids. Our PIO put out something this week, an advisory on what to do for Halloween. I hope that all citizens will go to the community advisories on the different listservs here in the city and follow our instructions. We want it to be another safe and happy Halloween. We are also working on these crimes. We've been offered for our robbery. There's a victim assistance group that is here in Montgomery County I've worked with when I was with the county. They have made an offer to us for a reward for the robbery where the gentleman was stabbed. We're going to be following that up, and you'll hear more on that. With this, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Plevy, our PIO, on a new program, another way for our citizens to get involved, our young people to get involved with information on a new thing, and it will start tomorrow. Kathy?
Hello, everyone.
Welcome.
Thank you for your time. My name is it. The new program that we're going to implement is called TIP 411. It allows anyone with a cell phone to send anonymous tips via text messages to the police department 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It enhances our connection, like the chief said, to the younger children in the community. And the text messaging also allows us a follow-up feature. It's an unlimited 2-way anonymous text message communication, and the texts are reviewed and responded to in real time. So when they send the text, I'm getting it at that moment that something's occurring. We're thinking that this is another eyes and ears tool for the city of Tacoma Park to create a safer community, safer schools, and let the children and the older generation get involved. It's monitored by a company called Citizen Observer, and the technology they use removes all identifying information that the sender sends. So it wouldn't have a name, it wouldn't have a phone number, it only has a tip number with an ID number next to it. It's not a program that they would use in an emergency to call. We would still emphasize they have to call 911 in an emergency. It is strictly a tip line. It helps, I think texting now, I think the kids as young as 8, older populations learning to text, I think in today's world everybody's texting everything. I think it's a good tool today to use. Sometimes when kids feel afraid to come forward or they just don't want to get involved, they don't want to get involved. And I was thinking of 2 different scenarios with the new TIP program. Kids in school are often afraid to come forward when they see someone doing something wrong in school, even though they want to pretend to be a part of it, but secretly they want to tell somebody, but they're afraid to. So this would take away the stigma of them having to out somebody in their school, and it wouldn't get them ostracized in school. They could just tip any kind of tip to us, anything like a weapons issue, a drug issue, a gang-related issue, or something where they wouldn't feel like they had to come forward themselves and get into trouble. Another scenario that comes to mind, saying that, is the gang population. I know it's prevalent here, it's here, in all the surrounding jurisdictions, and I think that kids that are in, I don't think that every kid in a gang, it's my personal opinion, wants to be in a gang. I think maybe they perhaps made that choice at a different time in their life, and maybe they don't want that lifestyle anymore, but now they're afraid to get out of the gang for fear of whatever fear was put into them. I think if they were allowed to text from the inside of a gang and say what's going on, it's also another way to kind of disband any kind of gang things that are going on. It's a way for them to get out in some cases, or at least try to get out without fear for themselves or their family. I did ask Citizen Observer about the pranks, because obviously I'll be getting the tips, and I don't want a ton of pranks coming my way at midnight. And they said that it was really almost minimal compared to the good that they've gotten. I think Citizen Observer has the Tip 411 system and Tip 411 in 40 states now, and they're getting really good feedback on it. So essentially, a person texting in a tip would use their own cell phone. A third-party company, like I said, removes all identifying features and encrypts it and replaces it with an ID number. And then they would type in the telephone number and then TPPD tip, and then type in their tip after that. And like I said, I would get that, and the chief would get a copy of that in real time. And then it would be my job to send it to either the patrol sergeant or a detective or the chief himself, depending on what kind of tip it is and what it's about. I think, I forget where I read, it was 220 million people now are using cell phones and texting, and I think it's a really good way to reach out. Even with our new theft from vehicles that's going on, even if there's a kid out there that doesn't want to come forward because they think it's their friend and they just want to tell somebody, texting, it's easy for them to do. It's really easy. And they also said that, texting now is like, it's an anywhere, anytime, silent and anonymous approach to crime reporting. Even if you can't get a voice, the bars to get a phone call across, you can still text. You don't need the signal as much as you do for the voice. And to spread the word about the tool, it was my idea to talk to the media. I've already had one of the news crews interested in doing the story for me on it. And also going to the principals of our school system and trying to get the message out to all of their students as well through the city. And that's it.
Thank you. Sounds very interesting. Councilmember Snipper.
Quick question. I didn't hear whether this is a free text or not. Some services charge for texting.
It is a free text. It's unlimited two-way real-life chat.
Okay.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. Did you say you do have the phone number now that we could tell people what the phone number is?
I do. I'm actually going to put out a press release in the morning.
Okay.
Did you want me to give it to you now?
Sure. If you have it, we're on countywide TV.
Okay. Actually, if you don't mind if I just confirm that with you.
No, that's fine. We can always do it next week.
Just send you a tip right now.
You're going to send me a tip now? To be better,
If they have a tip, they can
prepared?
call 270.
Is it? It actually is. I'm sorry, I do have it. Type in 847-411, and then after you dial that in, as if it's the phone number, then you type in TPPD-TIP, and then the message.
We'll be putting that out on the, obviously, the listservs tomorrow. There'll be a press release. We're going to be making up some little posters to put out and distribute. So we'll be getting the word out. Hopefully, that's another way to reach out to the community. And as Kathy said, everybody seems to be texting today. I went to a wedding Friday night, and they're sitting at the table texting each other across the room. But that's what young people do today, and that's what our officers are doing. We're using texting. So I think it's another way to get people involved. If that's what it takes to get, solve a crime, I think it's worth the investment we're making on this, and I think it'll be worthwhile for the city.
I think it's a great program, and we might also want to suggest that the kids remember to delete their sent text afterwards, so that somebody picks up their phone, they wouldn't realize they had sent a message. Good idea, thank you.
And even though there's no identifying information, we can stay connected to that person through the ID number that we're giving. So we can still reconnect with them. They don't have to respond, but we can reconnect if we have a question or anything else.
Good, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Send me a text, respond tomorrow.
We'll now move to our next item, which is a resolution commenting on the zoning text amendment on the CR zone. And explain the resolution. This is so that Councilmember Victoria can go to the county council tomorrow and testify at their public hearing.
Correct.
So,
Sure. Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, council members. Tonight I'm here to present the draft resolution regarding the zoning text amendment for the CR mixed commercial/residential zones. The draft resolution was developed based on the comments discussion we had last Monday at the council's work session. In general, the resolutions recommends and supports the CR zone with certain conditions. And tonight I'd like to briefly go over them. I will not be going over each individual item that's in the resolution, but I will be grouping them into categories. And I also like to point out right now that specific values, that numeric values that we had discussed last week, for a particular recommendation, they were removed. Staff felt that it's more appropriate to use a generic direction recommendation. For example, it's an increase or a decrease rather than assigning a particular value. And staff felt that we should let the county decide and evaluate the recommendation and work on the final recommendation. And so, in general, there are three categories that the resolution is, I guess, they're areas that we would like to recommend changes to the zoning text amendment. The first category relates to the pedestrian environment. Resolution recommends that any auto-related uses either be changed to special exception or be removed from permitted uses. The resolution also suggests that, recommends that an increased flexibility be adopted in terms of building setback as well as landscape requirement in order to facilitate shared parking access, shared driveway and parking areas. And the second category is to support the redevelopment of smaller properties in the city. There are many small properties in the city of Tacoma Park. There are less than 1 acre. We would like to encourage, help them, provide incentives for them to redevelop. And so therefore the resolution recommends that the the open space requirement be exempt for parcels of land that's less than 1 acre in size, and as well provide additional incentive density for acres for parcels that are less than 1 acre in size. And there's special language in the resolution that makes sure that properties such as Walgreens, which is a large parcel of land that is consisted of many small parcels that are less than 1 acre, be excluded, not eligible for this special exemption. And the third and last category is to provide a greater local review process for the lawfully existing permitted uses. Currently, in this zoning text amendment, lawfully existing uses maybe reconstruct or renovate up to 10% of their existing building square footage, or 30,000 square feet, whichever that is less, without a site plan approval process. And therefore, the resolution recommends that a formal site plan or other revenue of approvals process be adopted for the city, and that will encourage and allow the city to review any redevelopment. And the resolution also recommends that a better definition or clear definition of what renovate and what renovate and reconstruct means. And so these are the basic big categories of items that we're recommending. And you'll see in your package that there's also Appendix A that is made part of the resolution. They are items that are relating to providing more clarity, definitions, or consistency in languages, and I will not be going through that.
Okay. Thank you. Does somebody want to move the resolution? Moved by Councilmember Clay, seconded by Councilmember Wright. Discussion? Councilmember Wright.
I appreciate that we went more general in some areas and less specific. I still do have some concern about the way we're dealing with the small lots, so I've been thinking about this a little bit and wonder if we have examples from other places around the country that might have faced similar planning challenges. And did they recommend and do the same thing that's being done here to cause the redevelopment of those small lots in a way that I think is in line with what the council would want, which is around supporting local business? And did that development actually take place at a scale that was appropriate to what they wanted to have happen with the larger mixed-use area? Do we know of examples like that, and is this what they used as a vehicle to do that?
I can't think of any examples at the moment. Are you more concerned about the open space requirement in particular?
What I'm suggesting is, last time we had a lot of debate about the best way to redevelop small lots, and the main focus was wanting to be able to do that. What I heard in a number of cases was to support small businesses and also maybe in some cases small property owners. And I imagine that we're not unique in this challenge that's being faced. There's probably other older communities that had small lots that wanted to develop in a way that took advantage of greater density and mixed use, but also preserved some of the local businesses and didn't basically end up just having all chains come in. So I'm wondering if there's examples of that happening, and did they propose these sort of zoning methods to do that?
I can answer just a little bit. Years ago, I worked for the City of Rochester, New York, and it also was a community that had many small properties and many small businesses and individual landowners like we have. There, almost everything went through site plan review, and you really did look to facilitate not only kind of what the business owner wanted, but how it fit into the scheme of things down the road and what the general vision was of the community for the area. We would need to find some of the specific regulations for you, and I'm sure there's many examples in northeastern cities because there's many similar kinds of situations.
What about Alexandria?
Well, there is a variety of places. One of the things that I've always been a little uncomfortable with is Montgomery County hasn't really had that vision before, and so this is a new approach for them. They've been more used to larger parcels, open land that you build on, and not the kind of really it's a hands-on compromise working with people that is the meat of this kind of resolution.
Narrow storefronts, food chain,
Okay. I mean, I would probably vote in favor because I know we've gone back and forth on this. I think there would be helpful to sort of have us not recreating the wheel, but saying, where has it worked?
Sure.
And I don't know Rochester, New York, maybe it's very successful, but it doesn't strike me as a place that people tout as a place that redeveloped in a great way. It may be just because it's smaller and off the radar screen that it hasn't happened.
No, but I think...
Whereas Alexandria is, but I'm not sure quite, I'm not sure Alexandria actually is the density that they're trying to achieve. I think we want to achieve to be transit-friendly development.
I'm sure we can find some examples to
Well,
pass
the
that
downtown
information for
area
you.
along the waterfront. It's relatively dense enough.
And I'm sure my good friend, the former mayor of Rochester, would feel that they did very appropriate development.
They may have, I'm just saying. I think it's a good learning for us.
Sure.
Councilmember Robinson.
Thank you for your work on this to push it around to where, to some modifications that we're all pretty comfortable with. We went over the weekend to the Maryland Municipal League Legislative Conference, and it struck me, I was thinking about these comments on the text amendment, and it struck me that, again, that this is not our zoning document, it's the county's zoning document. And what will happen, as far as I can tell, in Langley Park is that it will become more dense. It will become something more like a city, perhaps something more like Silver Spring. But it won't be a city. And I think it's unfortunate that, although I applaud the county for trying to get more hands-on and trying to think of things that are less large parcel, which has been their history, I'm just against, in principle, the county and the Parks and Planning Department creating cities that aren't cities, creating groups of people who have nowhere to go except Rockville or Upper Marlboro. So I'm going to abstain from voting on this. I'm not going to vote against it because I support our work on it, but I'm going to abstain, in essence, to protest our lack of direct input on this issue.
Other comments, Councilmember Victoria.
In the resolution, section 2, and also in the pedestrian comments that you've given to me, it mentions automobile rental services. I don't recall us talking about that last week. We talked about repair places, and we talked about sales places. Am I correct that rentals have jumped in here and weren't there before?
Yes, you are. Staff had a discussion about the automobile rental services. The way the use is worded, it's a little peculiar. It says automobile rental services excluding storage of vehicles and supplies. We're not sure how you could have a rental space for cars, but not actually have the cars parked nearby. The concern is that the owner or maybe the users will find ways to bring in the cars and not actually be, I guess, obliging to this clause of excluding storage. And the concern is also that with rental facilities, you have a lot of cars coming and going. So you're actually generating more traffic than some of the other retail uses because the sole purpose for this is to bring in a car.
Well, I can see that for Tacoma Langley, but there's certainly other places. If this is transit-oriented development, you may very well want a rental center so that people can take the train and get a car for certain trips. And I'm struggling to come up with an example, but there might be other places in the county.
Would this exclude Zipcar facilities? Because those are, in essence,
They don't
stored on
storage.
site.
Yeah.
Or stored rental cars.
Yeah.
I'm
Well, I'm even thinking even Hertz. I mean,
But even
you
a
want to have a
small
Hertz center near where people use transit.
Right. Then you
I
have
don't
a
think there may
shuttle
ever be any demand here, but at a Rockville site or at the Silver Spring Purple Line site, I could easily see someone wanting to have a rental counter there, if there's demand.
I'd just like to mention that in the text, there's reference to a shared car facility, and that particular wording is referring to the Zip car. So I would assume that this particular reference, it's not referring to Zip car services.
Yeah,
Well, I'm not sure I agree with the inclusion of automobile rental services simply because I don't presume to make that decision for the whole county.
So are you proposing to amend the resolution to delete the number 2 in the first resolve clause?
If everyone else, or if you don't.
Propose it, we'll see if it has a second, and then we'll deal with that one.
I propose deleting the deletion of automobile rental services excluding storage of vehicles and supplies.
Second.
I heard a second, I heard an acceptance as a friendly amendment. Is there anybody opposed to making that friendly amendment to the resolution? Councilmember Wright, do you have a comment?
I'm not opposed to a comment. I again feel like I'm making a decision in kind of a vacuum, because I don't know. I assume there's probably studies, and that you could show whether around transit sites like the Purple Line that'll eventually be there, whether a traditional rental car entity increases car mileage or reduces car mileage, because people, as Donna was saying, might use the facility to take, don't have a car and they take the train there to rent a car, or they live there and rent a car. So it's just, I feel like I'm making, you don't know which way it plays. So I again feel like I'm not able to make a real informed decision. I'm not opposed to it. I just, again, it feels like we're making recommendations around something we don't have expertise in. And I think we should come to these meetings with that advice from city staff.
Councilmember Stevens.
I was just wanting to know if the staff had any additional comments or suggestions on this.
I think in response to Councilor Wright's comment, I can't say that rental or automobile rental facilities are very common around transit stops, especially if it's a light rail stop. Usually you will see them at airports. And even I'm just thinking in Arlington or in DC, it's not the type of use that would be associated with a transit center, I don't think.
I bet some planner somewhere has studied this. That's my point.
Quick comment. There's a Enterprise rental place right up from the old Tacoma Co-op, Tacoma Park Co-op.
Where's that?
On
Carroll?
And that's a few blocks from the Silver Spring Metro. It's not real close, but it's... So I have a suggestion, another amendment to the friendly amendment. We could do the same thing we did with the automobile repair and services and make it reclassified as a special exception, just to highlight our concern about it. I mean, that would indicate to the county that we have a concern about this particular use. And then they, of course, would make the final call.
Okay. So you want to make a substitute amendment?
Yes, a substitute amendment.
And it's been seconded, so let me see if I can move this along. I think there's general agreement on that one. So all those in favor of the substitute amendment to change number 2 in the first resolve to making it, rather than deleted, to make it a special exception use. Quick show of hands. Any opposed? Okay, I think that was unanimous, so we now have the amended resolution. Are there any further comments? Any public comments? Okay. One last chance. Any further council comments? Okay. All those in favor of the resolution providing comment on zoning text amendment 0908 commercial residential zones, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Yes.
One abstention. Okay. That passes. Thank you. Next item is the second reading ordinance appointing election judges for the November 3rd city election. Would somebody like to introduce second reading of the ordinance?
Move. Second.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Take Your Pick. Yeah, there were about 4 voices all at once. Any comments? I'm leaving it up to the clerk. Any comments on the second reading?
Just make it up.
Any public comments on the ordinance appointing election judges?
Yes, my name is Pat Loveless, 762811 Tacoma Park. Oh, I got a couple of questions. One is, how can you become an election judge? That's one thing. And two, are they going to be able to provide the same excellent service they provided me, being blind, to help me do my voting, and also to help other handicapped people vote? Because a lot of handicapped people don't know that they can get assistance voting. I believe it's the election judges you go to on that. I'm not 100% sure, because someone's always helped me. And also, I want to tell you people that November 3rd is Election Day, but November 4th is Joyce Seaman's birthday, and we got to get out there and give her a great ticket of thanks and happy birthday, and let's get everybody out there to vote. And the judges will help us, I think. I'm not sure, but I think that's what we ask.
Thank you. If the city clerk would like to answer the question about how you can become an election judge.
Sure. Prior to the election, we do solicit applications from people who are interested in serving.
Going down.
So we solicit applications, and the Board of Elections reviews them and makes recommendations to the council. And Pat, let me assure you that they all plan to provide excellent service to anyone who needs it.
Yeah, we got to let people know who to go to when they need help, because a lot of people didn't know that. They don't vote. They don't know. They don't seem to know.
Okay.
Well, we'll work harder to get the word out and help spread the word that people are welcome to come in if they need assistance.
Okay.
Thanks for your comments. Any other public comment on this second reading ordinance? Okay, all those in favor, we have to do a roll call. Second reading, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay. Aye. Councilmember Robinson. Aye. Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Victoria. Aye. Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
That passes unanimously. The next item is the consent agenda, which is now made up of only 2 items. Consent agenda item A, which is a resolution recognizing Municipal Government Works Month, and item C, resolution in support of the school superintendent's recommendation on school boundary changes.
Move the ordinance.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda passes unanimously.
We have to have a roll call.
No,
No.
it's all resolutions. We'll now take up the former item B as a separate item, which is the resolution approving an amendment to the land license agreement with the co-op. Councilmember Clay.
I asked to have this pulled from the agenda. We actually discussed this before in a work session, and so when I was reading my package, I noted that they're asking us to reduce the fee that they pay for licensure of the space, I think by half. It's down to $9,000, it's by half. But when you look and you read the original agreement, it looks like everything since then has just been sort of continuing to renew the original agreement. The agreement says that they'll pay 100% of the fee so long as the parking spaces provided are between 10, essentially more than 10 parking spaces, 10 to 16 parking spaces that they'll pay the entire fee. And my understanding is that there are 16 parking spaces that are available there right now. So as far as I can see, we are complying with the original licensure agreement as well as the amendments that have been made to it since then, and I don't see why we should go back and renegotiate it, particularly not on the consent agenda.
And if I can just add that after you brought this up and I looked at the license, I noted that it was not only for parking spaces, but it was for placement of containerized storage, trash receptacles, and loading dock, all of which I assume have not been reduced.
Right, they're all still there. So as far as I can tell, we're complying 100% with the agreement.
Any comments from anybody?
I have one other comment.
Okay, go ahead.
I would just say, not only do I think we're complying, I think there was a lot of suggestion when the fire station construction was going to happen that there was going to be lots of vehicles associated with construction in the lot, and was really going to hamper the parking and the use of the co-op. And from what I've seen, that has not been the case. And every time I've gone to the co-op, which is frequently, I like to frequent the co-op, or have driven by or run by, I've never seen the parking lot full to a situation where the co-op's losing business as a result of this or anything like that.
Does the city manager have any comments?
Negotiating here. I think this is a case where, it's not a matter of whether or not we're complying with the agreement. I think the feeling of the co-op, and Jesse, I think, has had direct conversations with them, as has Daryl, is that the spaces that were available prior to construction of the fire station has been reduced by about half. Daryl has confirmed that. I think Jesse has as well. So I think the feeling of the co-op is just that what they had and what they were previously paying for has essentially been reduced. I'm not the advocate for the co-op. I'm just simply stating what they have told us, and which I think is actually valid.
What is in their contract has not been reduced.
Right.
What is in the agreement?
What they were paying for was not what they were using for free has been reduced.
Yes, there have been, as I understand it, about 30 spaces prior to the fire station construction. I think that's now been reduced to about 14, which is within the boundaries of the agreement.
Yeah, and the licensure is not for the entire property. That's why it's a licensure and not a lease.
And there's other businesses that...
Right, it is available for general use, that's correct. Do you have anything you want to add?
No, just to recognize that the spaces are available for public use, and they are also, for anyone to use, and the fire station also does use those spaces. So, again, not trying to be an advocate for the co-op, but...
That's in the original licensure agreement, too, that they're open spaces. They're not specifically reserved to the co-op.
I believe there have been periodic problems with contractors on the fire station, basically parking in areas where they're not to be parking under the terms of the agreement. When that has been brought to our attention, Daryl has been in touch with the contractors, and she knows them, and the problems have been resolved. But that is a problem that sort of ebbs and flows.
The amendment does call for, if the construction is completed, they go back to the additional $750 a month if the construction is completed before the end of the fiscal year. Any month that the construction is, the temporary station is moved, they would pay the additional amount.
And so the license year of this agreement is the July 1 to June 30 fiscal year?
Yes.
And so we're now a couple of months into year 12 of the agreement, which is the year that's designated subject to negotiations.
Right.
If I can suggest, maybe the council might want to table this resolution and suggest to the co-op that there might be another way to get at what they were attempting to do, pointing out that according to the terms of the lease agreement, the council feels like the full payment would be due, and if they have something to suggest about the reduced abilities I can imagine that there might be some more difficulties with the delivery access or something like that, that there might be a possible different way to negotiate some adjustment. Councilmember Victoria.
Barbara, is the city still paying a note on this property, on this lot?
Not any longer. We paid the debt off, I believe it was about a year or so ago.
Okay.
Might have been the last 2 years.
But we did pay for a number of years.
I recall this argument back in 1998, and it seemed like a pretty substantial subsidy to the co-op in order to keep that parking for them as a city lot. So I was not sure what the status was right now. Thank you.
Councilmember Robinson.
I know there were parking meters along the Carroll Avenue side of this parking lot, dating all the way back to 98.
Yeah.
Are there still parking meters there? No.
Finally gone.
Do we know when they were removed?
Probably for the fire station construction.
Was it before that?
I think it was contemporaneous with it, I think.
No, I think it was before that.
I've never used a meter when I park there, and I park there all the time. I don't have to park.
Yeah, I wonder what our revenue stream was for the
I
meters.
try not to park where there's a meter and not feed it because I hate getting tickets.
So, yeah, I guess I appreciate your thoughts there, Bruce. I'm of a mind to say that they've had more than the original allotment of 16 spaces for many years, and now it's been cut down to what they had initially agreed to. So I'm not of a mind to modify at this point. But I appreciate your saying let's go back and tell them to give it another try.
I can see that they might try and make another argument.
Yeah.
But the argument basis in here doesn't seem to require this particular renegotiation, but year 12 is to be renegotiated, so try again.
Right.
So would somebody like to move to table this resolution?
Move.
Yeah.
All those in favor of tabling this to a time uncertain? Do I have the right motion? Can you table to a time uncertain, or do you have to table to a time certain? Okay.
Yeah, it actually, it will expire. I mean, with the council term.
We're going to be out of here.
We don't actually want to see this, I mean, I don't want to see this
Okay. So then,
again
okay.
anyway. Why don't
So
we
then
let it
one.
die?
So one. Maybe we should just vote it down. Okay.
Yeah.
Would somebody?
Move the ordinance.
Yeah. It's been moved.
And it's been seconded.
Yep.
All
those in favor?
All those in favor of the motion to pass the resolution as drafted? All those opposed to the resolution? Nay. Any abstentions? I see unanimous disapproval of this resolution. Not too often we do that. Okay. Then I would like to move to the first work session item, which is the formerly number 7 item on the agenda, which is the discussion of request to extend the term of the pilot agreement for 8508 and 8510 Flower Avenue, and I'm assuming that the people who are here to present this ones are hoping, I hope they don't make it 2 in a row.
You got all your names out of you now. You all gave up.
Thank you. I'm Linda Walker, and this is Stephanie Rudman, Development Manager and Legal Counsel for Montgomery Housing Partnership. And she's here tonight to discuss 8508, 8510 Flower Avenue, which is a 21-unit rental property in Ward 5. They purchased the property in April of 2007, and shortly thereafter the city entered into a 10-year graduated pilot with MHP, which expires in 2017. And the first 5 years, 100% tax abatement, the following 3 years, 75%, and the last 2 years, 50%. So she's here tonight to request an extension of this pilot. And in In the packet, you'll see that staff did prepare a chart which shows the financial impact of all of the city's pilots, so you can make reference to that during the discussion.
Thank you, Linda, for doing my introduction there, and I want to also thank Linda and Sarah for moving this up a little bit earlier so I didn't fall asleep on you. So as Linda mentioned, we did purchase the property in the spring of 2007, and at that time we started developing plans for the full renovation of the property. We worked on it for a while, and last year in the fall, we were about to set up the financing, the permanent and construction financing for the project when sort of the low-income housing tax credit world fell apart along with the rest of the economy. And small projects like this that had received allocations from the state of 9% tax credits were unable to find syndicators. So at that time, we finalized our plans, and what's happened since then is we have, our tax credits are being syndicated by the state through the stimulus bill, actually, and the state's buying the credits. And so we have all our financing lined up. And we are about to close on the financing in the next week. We have, and I'll pass this out afterwards, we have 7 sources of financing for the renovations of the project, not counting the 2 pilots and the acquisition loan, which makes a total of 10 sources of financing for these 21 small units. I'll just tell you briefly that it's pretty much a gut rehab. We're replacing all the systems in the project. We're replacing most of the plumbing, electrical, there's a new roof. It's going to be a green property under the Enterprise Green Community standards. It's going to also have a community center with after-school programs, a business center, and it's also going to have a leasing office for not only this property, but also our what we called our Tacoma Park Preservation Project, which is 3 buildings, one just down the street at 8624 and 26 Flower, our property around the corner at 641 Houston, and the bright blue and yellow building at University, 1001, 3, and 5 University. So we are about to close. As I mentioned, we have a traditional construction loan from Citibank, and that's the reason why we're here, and I'll get into that. There's about a little under a $3 million loan from the county's HIF fund. We have about $1.1 million in tax credits through the Recovery Act. We have about $200,000 in our deferred fee. We have $250,000 in RHPP funds. We have a NeighborWorks grant of $170,000 and an energy grant from the state in about $50,000. So we have a lot of sources of financing.
You don't have that Davis walkthrough, is that in effect?
No, but I will pass it out.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me just finish going through it, and then I'll pass it out to you. Citibank in the last week has told us that because when the Tacoma Park pilot expires, which is now in year 8 of the project since we've owned the project for 2 years, the debt coverage ratio gets below 1.15, which is what they are underwriting to because of the increase in taxes. And so what we're here to request is that the project maintain this 50% abatement of tax credits for as long as the property is affordable. The county currently gives us an abatement, 100% of abatement of taxes for the life of the property, as long as the property is affordable. And so this helps keep the debt coverage ratio up. But then when the city's pilot expires, and in particular in this project, because it's such a small project, we have such a small first position loan that the expenses are very volatile, even with the small amount of the city taxes that we would be paying, maybe about $8,000, let's say, in 8 years, that basically the project sort of falls below the Citibank standards. So that's what we're asking for, is a continued abatement.
Questions, comments?
And I didn't realize there were so many people here, but I will pass out a couple of these just to look through.
Councilwoman Clay.
Well, Well, I'm not actually inclined to support this. Because I feel like we already negotiated the agreement and have the, I guess I'm not inclined to support it as a pilot right now. We already negotiated the agreement and have the confirmation for the affordability. I think it would be really difficult for us to go back and reopen negotiations with all of our entities, and I don't want to encumber I think this would be the first time we went it's 40 years is the length of your affordability agreement, isn't it? I don't want to encumber the taxes out for 40 years. I would be willing to consider a 2-year extension of the agreement so that, like right now, you've kind of spent the first 2 years essentially. I'd be willing to restart the agreement at the current date so that we had 5 more years of 100, it's 5 years at 100%, right? And then the same term at 75 and the same term at 50, but I don't want to extend this out to the entire life of the agreement. Alternatively, if what you need is an infusion of cash to make the project work, I believe that we have some CDBG money in affordable housing. Is it currently available to spend?
I can actually say that we can't put CDBG money into this project. Because we cannot, because it tips off all sorts of other requirements that are not factored into the project.
Like you'd have to comply with some standards that PUD has?
Davis-Bacon.
Like Davis-Bacon was. You can do it from the beginning, you can't do it right in the middle, because there's not the money to do it.
What happens when we use CDBG, like we used CDBG money, which I think you suggested, Bruce, to refund our pilot account, if you will? Not that we have one, but I think you had talked about that once. You talked about spending the CDBG money on pilots, essentially. We do the pilots, and then we reimburse it out of our CDBG fund. You don't remember this conversation?
No.
All right. Well, in any case, I'm not willing to extend it, personally. I don't know how other people feel for the entire length of the project, but I would be willing to reset at the current date. I don't know if that helps you or not.
Actually, it would help us if it could go out for 15 years, because that's the term of the Citibank loan.
Councilmember Wright.
I'm also sort of a little hesitant to extend, because it feels like there's a lot of people in putting money in, some for-profit entities and some nonprofit entities, and some government entities. And so, you're sort of coming back to us to renegotiate, and I'd be more interested in going back to Citibank to renegotiate, because I know some of this is a political statement, but where was Citibank thinking about their debt service ratios when they were making all those terrible loans? And Citibank is one of the companies that got very significant money from the federal government in terms of bailout money, and they're continuing to pay bonuses, which I would consider morally wrong, and I know that doesn't affect your project. I know you're trying to get your project built, and it'll benefit and provide low-income housing in our city, but I say we need to go back to Citibank or think of some other creative way. Like, could you get a shorter-term loan? Maybe that changes the interest rate in a negative way, but which, I don't know all the financing, but one of the options would be you get a shorter-term loan, and then you come back to us after 10 years, and if the situation still requires if the debt service hasn't changed based on how income levels have changed, this is probably 50% of median income, right? Like if the dollars then are not able to finance a refinanced loan, then maybe we can talk about a pilot. But for us to guarantee now and take the risk off the table going out when there's for-profit companies that I think just haven't been good partners to society, I have a lot of trouble.
I'm not sure I can respond for Citibank in what they're paying their employees right now. But I can say that they're not a flexible organization, and we can't go back to them and say, how about in 8 years you kind of go below your debt coverage ratio. They have their committees, and they have their standards, and they're completely
Those
inflexible.
must be new committees and new standards, I guess.
That's
that
true.
Come up with now.
They are. They're new. We did a loan with them 2 years ago for Tacoma Park. It was nothing like it is right now.
And I'm sure you repaid that loan completely, and there's been no problems with your debts with Citibank, so.
Correct. Yes, also, we can't get a shorter-term loan. For low-income housing tax credits, you have to have a fixed loan for the term that the property is affordable. So you have to have a fixed loan for 15 years. So that's the minimum, so that's not an option either.
Okay, Councilmember Sniffer, then Councilmember Victoria, then Councilmember Clay.
I share some of the concerns of my fellow council members, particularly about setting precedents of renegotiating this. However, I think this is a really good project. I've seen the building. I think this will continue to revitalize the rental property along Flower Avenue. It sets a real standard for what the other landlords are going to have to live up to. But I am concerned about doing it in perpetuity. I like the suggestion of limiting it to the length of the loan, the 15-year loan thing. I think that would, in my mind, sort of mitigate a bit the business of renegotiating this 2 years after we initially gave this to you.
Councilmember Victoria.
My limited understanding, but as I look at the pilot agreements on our work session piece, it looks like the initial agreement was 15 years. If we're going out to 2022, and then taking Councilmember Clay's suggestion to add 2 years, that is 15 years. It looks like you already, before my time, you're still doing 50% through 2022.
No, I think it's two, yeah.
No, it's just a 10-year.
It's 10 years. It
10-year
goes
pilot.
through
It started in
2017.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the new one,
Well, then why-
the ones that have A under it would be what the extension would cost.
We just extended it
Gotcha.
out, right.
Thank you.
So can I have,
Councilmember Clay, then Councilmember Owens.
so I'm going to recommend that we go with a 50% pilot for 15 years. That resolves your issue, is that correct?
Yes, that does.
Okay, well, yeah.
15 years from this year.
From whenever your loan starts, or
Right.
15 years and
Hopefully
3 months,
Monday,
if that's
yeah.
what you need, but,
Yes.
yeah, I recommend that we change this to a 50% pilot for 15 years, so that they can meet their loan criteria.
Everybody calculated
And
what
is
that costs?
Is that changing the beginning
Yeah, that changes
percentages?
the beginning. What you need is 50% for 15 years, right?
Well, what I think I would request was, since we have 8 years left, so it would be 7 additional years at 50%. That's what I would request.
But I'm hearing two different things. I'm hearing you
Tacking
say-
on 7 years to the pilot.
I'm hearing you say, put the 50% on the end to get to the 15 years.
Yes.
I'm hearing you say, change the pilot to 15 years, each of the 15 years of the pilot.
That, yeah, does that meet your loan requirements?
I'd have to run the numbers. I can't do it right now, actually.
And it's not something that we're passing tonight.
Right.
So that we're recommending changed language for whatever comes before us. So maybe my recommendation would be that try the numbers at 50% for 15 years, and if that doesn't work, what is it that works that you need in the early years, and then the maximum number of 15% for
Basically,
15
your proposal would be to, let's see, we've gone through 2 years. So it would be to eliminate 3 years, 50% for 3 years, and 25% for
3 additional years.
For 3 years,
Yeah.
right.
Do you say yes? That just lost me.
Yes, I totally understood what she said.
Okay.
So we're actually, so that is the equivalent of, for 50% for 3 years is 150, and then it's 25% for 3 years, which is another 75%. That's what, two and a quarter, and we're talking about adding two and a half. So it's only a little bit more money than we.
4 1/4.
Yeah,
So
it's only a little bit more
minor
money
amount.
than we've already committed. So we're kind of staying even. in any case,
So we're not changing by much, but it's making it possible for you to
just stretching it out over the 15 years.
do what you need to do and not
It
have...
could be. I don't want to say yes.
Right, okay.
It could be. I mean, we've
Right.
already,
I'd like
Let
you
me
to
see.
look at that.
I will. Sure.
And I feel like we could find a 15-year solution to this that works.
okay, let me, I can run the numbers and talk to Linda.
Councilmember Robinson.
I appreciate the analysis of following Councilmember Clay that you're able to do there on such a short notice. These are 21 units we're talking about, am I right?
Yes.
Okay, and the project cost is $5.346 million.
Yes.
And so you do the math, and it's $254,000 and $596 a unit.
Yes.
And how many bedrooms are these units?
Ones and twos. I think it says on the first page, 11 one-bedroom and 10
Oh,
two-bedrooms.
there you are. So that seems like a lot of money, $250,000 a unit for a rehab. I mean, wow, I'm stunned. And I'm wondering if, in the changed economic climate we have, if you could get to the same outcome by reducing the amount that you were borrowing, and therefore getting your debt ratio in better shape in the future. I know that construction costs have gone down. I see it's $1 million for professional fees and soft costs, and I don't want to second guess your analysis, which I know I'm doing, but I'm stunned at $254,000 for a one-bedroom rehab.
That includes the acquisition price as well.
I understand.
Well, I would agree with you that the figures are stunning, but I would also tell you that these numbers have been picked over by more people than you can imagine. The county goes through every line item, every contract that we have. The state looks at every single invoice that we have and every projected dollar amount. There's no extra cushion in the project at this point, and no one's getting rich
You
off
could
this
never
one.
sell a one-unit condo for $250,000. It would never fly, or a two-bedroom condo anywhere near here. So I guess I would encourage you to, I know it's way down the track, but I also know that you'll be coming back to us. And I encourage you to look closely at that and see how it is that we're spending our tax, or we're giving up tax dollars for these very expensive apartments.
Right, but we also have to remember that these will be affordable for,
For somebody.
40-plus years.
Right, they'll be affordable for somebody.
Right.
Councilmember Snipper.
Just up the street from me, Tenacity is selling condos that won't be even anywhere near this nice for close to $200K per unit.
Okay.
Just as a piece of information. They're slowly selling them, but they're selling them.
Also, I want to mention that these buildings have been through such neglect since they were built in the 60s that we really built almost a whole new building besides the shell. So you're putting in a whole new plumbing system, a whole new electrical system. You're really updating everything in the building, which is why there's a big cost. A lot of people do superficial rehabs, and if you put in, new cabinets and new floors, it's 20,000 units. So we are longtime owners, so we got the whole building, so we can keep it nice.
And often renovation like this would be more expensive than building from scratch. It's not unusual, so I'm not surprised by the cost.
Depending on what it is.
Councilmember Snipper.
Just for the record, I don't have any problem with affordable units being small with old appliances and so on. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. So I kind of agree with Councilmember Robinson that this seems a bit like a very expensive renovation, and that if I had input, like I assume Dan would have suggested that less be done, so that it was in fact cheaper per unit.
Well, I'm happy to talk to you sometime about where you think we could cut costs. We've had a lot of discussions about cutting costs, and I assure you we're not spending extra money. we would keep anything that works.
Any other comments? So we have the direction that staff needs to come back with a resolution.
Good.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we will take a short break and then come back for the next item, which is the presentation and discussion on the sidewalk study. Which isn't really item number 4 anymore, which is the presentation and discussion of the sidewalk study. And Suzanne Ludlow is here with our consultants.
That's right. We've got Carol Kashdourian and R.J.
Eldridge.
I just know you by R.J.
It works. It works.
From Tool Design Group here to present their findings and work on the recommendations for sidewalk installation and ADA compliance. And they are going to show a PowerPoint first. So for those who don't have eyes in the back of their head, if you want to move around, I think we're just going to jump right into the PowerPoint, and then we'll turn the lights back on and talk about it.
So we haven't had to jump around and view from out there. In here, this is the first and hopefully almost the last.
I would hope so.
But they can, if they have this.
Or you can follow along with your sheet. What would you prefer to do?
We do, but it's so small we can...
Okay.
What would
Is
you
anybody
prefer?
going out there?
Oh, like that.
Come on.
They're going to turn the lights down and turn it off for the people in the
If they're going to go out, then I'm going to
Might
stand.
as well rest your eyes, not facing the camera.
All right.
I guess I didn't have to do it.
Let's see, actually, Carol, you need to sit at a mic.
Can I use this mic?
Ah, very good. Can I use it? You need to switch on the switch.
And I have to turn it on.
There's a little...
Okay.
Okay, it's on now.
It's on? Hello? It's on?
It's on.
It was good.
It's on.
It's on?
Yes.
Okay.
You're in the bottom of the screen, however.
Now you're blind down.
Why don't you can, no, whatever. Am I here?
Short leash.
Short leash, okay. Thank you. We are very pleased to be here tonight. I'm Carol Kachadorian, as Suzanne said, and this is R.J. Eldridge. And if you left your materials up at the dais, that I won't tell you about a switch in the order of 2 of the slides. So we'll just get started. We are here today to report on 2 projects that are very much related. And what we're reporting are priority recommendations for installing sidewalks that are missing, making non-ADA compliant sidewalks compliant, installing curb ramps that are missing where there is a sidewalk but no curb ramp, and making existing curb ramps that are not compliant ADA compliant. These are actually 2 separate projects funded from 2 sources of money. The Missing Sidewalks projects is funded with state Safe Routes to School funds. And I guess I need to stand over here. There we go, so I can see it. Thank you. The project focuses on priority routes for walking to schools. The school district has endorsed particular routes, so we have emphasized those particular walking routes in our work. And we will identify where sidewalks are not missing that ought to be installed. Second project is about ADA compliant. This is funded with CDBG funds, and we did an assessment of existing sidewalks and curb ramps in the city to identify the level of compliance or non-compliance. And the recommendations for the compliance activities, that the investments that the city can make, are really in this presentation and in our recommendations divided into two parts. The sidewalk compliance recommendations are in the list of the sidewalk projects, and the curb ramp compliance recommendations are separate, and those will come second. Project for the City of Tacoma Park was managed by Vanita Enola George. I was the project manager for Tool Design Group. We had two teams of folks that did field work. The first two folks that did their field work in February when it was cold and snowy were Jim Elliott and Jake Aftergood. Jim and Jake also were with us for two public comment sessions that we had. Earlier this month, we went out in the field again to collect some additional data. Carrie Rainey from our staff and one of our interns, I don't remember his last name, Andy Gudgeon, thank you, conducted the field work then. And Trevor Griffith, who is our principal mapper, has taken the information, put it into GIS that we collected, put it into GIS, and helped us visualize it through the maps and the spreadsheets. Okay, our project schedule. We've been working on this since early this year. As you can say, January, February, we did an initial inventory of sidewalks and curb ramps and some assessment. February, March, April, May, we had two public input sessions. We did an analysis of existing conditions and reported that to you in April. And then this month we did some additional field work because there were some other pieces of information that we needed to complete our recommendations. And today we are providing you with that priority list of sidewalk projects as well as the ADA curb ramp compliance projects. First, we're going to talk about the sidewalks, the way we put that priority ranking together. The list includes commingles, missing sidewalks, and sidewalks that are not ADA compliant. We identified a number of elements to rank blocks where sidewalks were missing, and these are the elements that we included. Whether or not there was a sidewalk. When we say absence of sidewalk, that means if there was no sidewalk at all in the block segment, that segment received the highest score possible. If there was a sidewalk on one side, it got a lower score, and if there was a sidewalk on both sides, then it wasn't rated. So we looked at the presence of a sidewalk, whether that if you installed a sidewalk, it would provide a connection to a pedestrian generator. It would provide a connection to a Safe Routes to School priority project or to an existing sidewalk. We also looked at the topography to determine how easy or difficult it would be to install a sidewalk that would be ADA compliant. Retaining walls are pretty costly, so we had a couple of, I think 3 different levels of the need based on the topography, for a retaining wall based upon the topography. We also looked at the number of obstacles, trees, utility poles, that would have to be moved. Trees could be replanted elsewhere. And finally, we looked at available right-of-way. Obviously, if you're going to install a sidewalk in the public right-of-way, you have to have right-of-way, so we took a look at that. In terms of sidewalks that were non-compliant, we had 2 major things we looked at. We looked at, first of all, whether it connected to a pedestrian generator, and we had a list of pedestrian generators that we used for both projects, or both rankings. We also did, in our earlier work, identified the level of need for ADA compliant, and what that means is how many things needed to be corrected. And so we looked at the condition of the sidewalk pavement itself. We looked at if there were excessive cross slopes or running slopes, and we looked at pinch points or obstacles. So we looked at these elements, we had scores, and I think you can see some of the scoring on the spreadsheet that you received. And we created 3 tiers of these projects. the projects that had the highest scores, or therefore the greatest need or benefit, need to correct ADA noncompliance issues or benefit of installing a sidewalk are in the top tier, the middle ones in the second tier, and the lowest in the third tier. We like the idea of using 3 tiers that are relatively broad. It will allow the city to rebundle and package projects as seems appropriate and as funding is available. You might take a high priority project in one tier, and because it's right next to a lower priority project in another tier, there's efficiency of doing those two together along the same street. So that's what this 3-tier system does. All the data is in a GIS system, and so it is ultimately manageable, manipulatable, reformatable, and it can also be used as an asset management tool and a performance management tool for the city as well. Here's a little bit more detail on the prioritization that we used. In terms of the way, this relates to the numerical assignment for a segment by category. So for major pedestrian generators, if the missing sidewalk would link to a school, it got the highest score. Multifamily housing, park entrances, commercials, or institutional centers received a somewhat lower score, but if it didn't connect to one of these things, it didn't get any score at all. In terms of obstacles, there's kind of a 2 ways of looking at this. Block segments that are missing sidewalks but have a lot of obstacles, including steep terrain and would require a retaining wall, received a lower score because the cost to install would be higher. On the other hand, non-compliant ADA sidewalks that had obstacles or other issues relating to the non-compliance received a higher score because there's a more compelling reason. There's a legal commitment to make those sidewalks compliant. So the obstacles worked one way for missing sidewalks and the other way for non-compliant sidewalks. In terms of the right-of-way, ideally we looked for 10-foot right-of-way. That would allow for a 5-foot buffer and a 5-foot sidewalk. And we didn't have GIS information on the amount of right-of-way, so we estimated it. We did measuring from aerial photography and parcel data that we had in GIS. So we did all of that, and you have this map that shows the sidewalk projects by tier. The red are those that are in the highest tier, yellow middle tier, and green lowest tier. So once we identified those, we then did some costing, and this is a summary of the costing. If we can, you can see that the total is about $40 million. Bottom 2 tiers are about $17 million. Top tier is $6 million. Let me tell you a little bit about the way we did the costing, and I hope that's the next slide. Thank you. We used, we broke this into different types of costs. We have a standard per linear foot cost for installing sidewalk. I think that's, I don't know, at $43. We did, we estimated the cost to construct a retaining wall, and we used 3 levels, 0 to 1 foot, 1 foot to 3 foot, and anything above 3 feet. We included a cost to remove a tree and replace it somewhere else, so the city does not lose that green cover that it has. We assumed the cost to install a curb ramp for every sidewalk, and also there's a cost to relocate utilities, and that can be kind of high, to relocate a telephone pole or a fire hydrant if need be. We totaled that, added a percentage for design, added a percentage for mobilization, and that means getting the crews out, and added a percentage for contingency. I want to say that we did all this, but these are still planning level cost estimates, so you can't take this. You need to do an engineering fieldwork and more detailed costing based on the fieldwork. Okay, so that's the information about the sidewalks, the missing sidewalks and the non-compliant sidewalks. And we're going to talk now about the curb ramps. So we went through a comparable ranking for curb ramps. And as you can see, the light square just kind of restates what we looked at in terms of ADA compliance for sidewalks. The darker box shows the things that we looked at for compliance with curb ramps. The width of the curb ramps, the cross and running slope of the curb ramps, the directions it served. Did it serve just one direction? Was it at the apex of the corner, or was there a curb ramp in each direction of the that could be crossed? Was there a detectable warning strip? I will say that there are a number of curb ramps in the city that don't have detectable warning strips, and those are really important for people with sight disability, so they know where the street starts. We took a look at the landing at the top of the curb ramp. Regardless of what style the curb ramp was, this is the place where somebody in a wheelchair can turn themselves and head in the right direction once they come up to the top. And we looked at obstructions to getting to that curb ramp. So after doing that, we created a 4-tiered system. We took a look at a number of these factors and came up with a scoring. And as you can see, the ramps that were most in need have a score of 9 to 10, and the lowest are 3 to 4. The other thing we did here is we established, well, that's okay, I'll explain that in a second. In terms of cost, we estimated $1,000 per curb ramp. We talked to the folks at the Maryland State Highway Administration who've done a similar inventory and assessment and costing for curb ramps and sidewalks along state roads. And they've said if there's one non-compliant element of a curb ramp, we just replace the whole thing. So we followed that approach here. There are 448 non-compliant or missing curb ramps in the city, and it'd be about $1,000 a piece, $450,000 to either install missing or replace non-compliant. Now, we used a slightly different method for calculating the priority ranking. We used what we call creating heat areas, a heat map, creating areas of the city where you really want to make sure the pedestrian network is solid. And it has a lot of the same elements. We have pedestrian generators. And what we did is we assigned values to each of these generators based upon distances from it. So, for example, within a quarter block of a library or a school or a hospital, pardon? Quarter mile, I'm sorry. Between a library, you might think that's really important, so you assign a high value to that. You might expect a lot of people to walk within a quarter of a mile, whereas 2 miles, you might not expect people to walk, so that would have a lower score. Based upon these scores, there's also sort of city policy or need or socioeconomic circumstances. Conventional wisdom and demographics bear out that multifamily housing, folks tend to walk or take public transportation more, so distances within those areas and also within public transit stops closer distances got a higher score, for example. And then we also looked at the level of need, and the level of need was based upon the severity of the ADA noncompliance. So we identified ramps with the highest need. In other words, they had the highest score. And we didn't forget that we had a public listening session. Once we had created the map of needs, we took a look back at what we heard from the public at the session specifically for ADA issues, and we found that we had addressed the concerns that were expressed there. So these are the two, the sidewalks and the curb ramps. We have a little bit of summary of the things that are here. The tiered system that we use, we developed, does give the city flexibility. I just want to restate that, to bundle the projects when you're able to do them in a way that's affordable for you. And because the information is in a GIS system, staff can use this as an asset management tool and a performance tool. Set a goal for what you want to accomplish. When you do projects, enter that into the system. At the end of the year, you know how you've done in terms of achieving your goals. There were some other issues that we came across when we were doing our field work. There are non-compliance issues that are vegetation growing on the sidewalk or gravel that has spilled down. If there's a city-owned sidewalk where this exists, it becomes a maintenance issue for the city. If it's a sidewalk that's adjacent to private property and the private property and its owner is responsible for maintaining it, it becomes an enforcement issue. So these two bullets are actually two sides of the same coin. We also would recommend that city staff continue to develop and enhance its knowledge of ADA standards and practices, because it's a legal requirement and it's really important. I think staff has a pretty good working understanding, but we encourage them to continue to develop that understanding. And certainly as ADA standards evolve and change over time, your design standards need to, your staff will know that, and your design standards need to change, so you make sure that you are building things and doing enforcement in the right way. And third time, the database is a good asset management tool for the city. So, and that's it. Are there any questions? Well, we can come up. Right. A good deal of information for you, and I just want to go over that information briefly. The Tool Design Group gave some 11 by 17 maps and spreadsheets. What's particularly helpful to us doesn't show on an 11 by 17. It shows on bigger maps, which show the segment with the number that applies to the spreadsheet. So if all of a sudden you're looking at a geographic area and you see 248, you can find on the spreadsheet where it is. And so that's something that just was not reproducible for you. But we'll have that available. We do have on 11 by 17 the curb ramp projects and the map that shows the 3-tier of the sidewalk projects. Provided in your package were 2 sets of spreadsheets. One is in an ID number format, which only helps if you've got the map that has the numbers on it. So it's not particularly useful. And for that reason, Councilmember Snipper very appropriately asked, could we get something in street name order? And so that was brought this evening so that you have that available. What we have that's the most useful piece is the spreadsheet in priority ranking order. And the first one on that is ID number 159 on Boyd Avenue. What this has under total priority score, about 2/3 of the way across the sheet, is the compilation of our various weights for the criteria that Carol went over in her presentation. And so there's one that's got a total priority score of 23, a couple 22s, but as you work your way down, there might be, 20 18s or that kind of thing. Well, yes?
Before we get started,
Yes.
can I ask about, you sent around the scoring
Yes.
point system? And, let's see, higher points mean greater need for sidewalk, I understand that. The F, ADA sidewalk compliance, however, has a high, rating of high from ADA study is 17 points. What does that mean?
Well, you can talk, why don't you talk about it first?
You want me to? Sure. When we originally had the scoring, developed the scoring system by these elements, we realized that the missing sidewalks could have, a segment could have a score that was, I think, as high as 25.
Yeah, 27.
And the way we had set up the system, the ADA, non-compliant ADA sidewalks maximum score, I think, was 16.
Okay.
That bore itself out when we did the work, and staff expressed some concern that the ADA sidewalks might get a short shrift because they may not even.
They would never fit in the first tier.
In the first tier.
Yeah. So we.
And have you done this in other places before, or is this a whole new Tacoma Park score system?
I should say the actual scores associated with those, I mean, they reflect local sort of policies and approaches, but this tool of using a ranking system like this is something that communities around the city, or around the country, I'm sorry, are using. So this is nothing new, it's just the numbers attached reflect local priorities.
And what does that mean by local priorities? Because I was
It means staff said, gee, we need to make sure that we recognize obstacles and the cost of those things and the connection to safe routes to schools, because of the kind of funding sources and goals that we had for this project.
I see. And I note that if I can butt Insky again here, if there's no slope, it gets a high score. So a hill, the harder it is to get up, the lower the score
The
gets.
slope is not the slope of the sidewalk,
It's the cross slope across where the sidewalk could go. So from the front yard down to the street, that really refers more to the feasibility or ease of installing a
cut you have to do, right?
Exactly, cut and fill.
So that's a cost issue.
Right.
So if something's going to cost more, it has a lower priority.
Correct.
That's right. For the regular missing sidewalks, we did factor that in that way. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I think that one of the things that, did cause us to put a good amount of staff time and certainly consultant time into this was trying to figure out what made the most sense in terms of these rankings, because we did have these very different goals. We wanted to get rid of obstacles for ADA purposes, but if it wasn't important for an ADA compliance thing, we wanted the cheapest sidewalks where they got the biggest biggest bang for the buck for safe routes to school or some other kind of connection. So, yes.
So I hate to put it this baldly, but so you jiggered the scoring to come up with so that a particular sidewalk segment that you thought needed to be done would come up with a
Well, we
nice
didn't,
score,
we didn't
so
look at
on.
particular sidewalk segments for that purpose. We looked at these principles about trying to have low-cost sidewalks where there was an important route, that kind of thing. And then we would come back, they would run the numbers, and we'd look at it, and it made a lot of sense. There was this adjustment that had to do with the ADA compliance, because that looked a little bit out of whack, and we wanted to do that. One of the things that, depending on how you go forward with this, is important, is if we all of a sudden say, gee, we don't care if there's a retaining wall there or not, then we can change the ranking systems. If there is an existing sidewalk that's not compliant, there are a lot of different things to look at, and we, in essence, created a subsystem for ranking those that is reflected in item F.
I need a little bit of clarity there. If there's an existing sidewalk, and if the current compliance is high, does that, and that's where my question is, does that mean it's pretty compliant?
No.
It's the opposite.
It means
the
it's not
opposite.
compliant.
It means that there is a high
high
level of
need.
non-compliance, there's a high need to make it compliant.
Oh, I see. It's the need to make compliant. So the 17-pointer, it's
that would be the
slanty, or it
pavement.
doesn't, it's bumpy, or something like
Right.
that.
There could be
Okay.
heaving, there could be pinch points, the cross slope could be excessive.
Good, thank you.
Imagine that the database that you set up now is probably going to be a pretty good tool for the city and something that we can keep for a long time, if we keep it up. I'm kind of interested in maps that haven't prioritized all this stuff, because I can tell you already that the prioritization that you have here doesn't match what the needs are in my ward. So I think it'd be interesting to see kind of what we could generate and some of the baseline information. And just to give you an example, right in front of my house is a red line, so I could have maybe a sidewalk in the first round, which is totally cool, except that Hayward Avenue doesn't need a sidewalk nearly as much as Lincoln Avenue does. That's a major route. Both Lincoln and Boyd are major routes that the bus follows, so you've got all these kids that are gathering around bus stops. And I didn't see in your presentation where you looked at bus stops, so while we did.
Actually, Boyd was identified for us by staff as a high-priority walking
route to
route
school.
for school kids to walk to school. And the coloration, the ranking along here reflects the existing conditions, whether there is a sidewalk or isn't a sidewalk, if there's right-of-way.
Well, there isn't a sidewalk from Jackson east on either Lincoln or Boyd. But I think, Bruce, don't both your sides of the street, on both sides, has a sidewalk, right?
Yes.
In front of your house? So here we've got red, so we've got a Tier 1 on Lincoln Avenue between Jackson Avenue and Old Carroll. It already has a sidewalk, and it's pretty darn walkable. But in between, it's not perfect, but you can use it. In between Jackson on Lincoln or Boyd, all the way back down until Boyd dumps into Lincoln, all the way over to Elm Avenue, there isn't any sidewalk there. And it's a place that has a lot of kids. Whereas if you move over just a little bit to Colby Avenue, I don't know how they feel about sidewalks or not, but that's not a through street. That's at the top of a T. And so while I would like to provide sidewalks for everybody who wants them, I certainly wouldn't put them at the top of the tier, because their street's actually fairly walkable. I walk on it all the time. And there's a few instances where that's the case. So Devonshire and Auburn, I think both are in desperate need of sidewalks. I can't remember if it's on Devonshire or Auburn Avenue where they had a kid that was killed, run over by a car, somebody essentially. It was a long time ago.
Easier.
I mean, if I could explain, this list has both blocks where there are no sidewalks, as well as blocks where there are sidewalks that are non-compliant. And I just looked, as you were talking, I looked up Jackson between Lincoln and Boyd, and it is a Tier 2 ADA compliance project. There are ADA violations. So that's why it's got the color that it is.
Sure. I think in my 4 years on the council, I could probably claim the title of queen of hammering on ADA issues. Maybe because for a long time there just weren't that many women on the council. I claim the title pretty well. I have to tell you, so I'm really sensitive to the issue, and it's important to me. But at some point, where there's absolutely no sidewalk, that means people are in the street, which is worse than being on a sidewalk that exists that's ADA non-compliant. And so just looking at this, Prince George's Avenue is the other street where they really, really want to have a sidewalk, and it's a through street from Ethan Allen across Elm Avenue, which is a major street, to New Hampshire. So I can just tell, looking at it, from the way that I see what pops to the top of the Tier 1 versus what's a Tier 3, is that the criteria that were used to develop the tiers don't end up in a final product that reflects what's important to the people in my ward.
Well, I appreciate that. I think one of the things that did take a lot of time is that we kept, going through this and talking out just exactly the kinds of things you have. At one point, we had some cul-de-sacs that popped up high as needing sidewalks, and that, because it didn't really connect to things, we adjusted those. There's plenty of opportunity to continue to adjust. One of the things that we tried really hard to do, though, was to, and it's not reflected in all this, it's somewhere in all of our stuff, was looking at the safe routes to school and what the routes were that we were looking at, or the going to and from the various generators. And one of the things that I think we'd be very interested in talking out when we go to a case-by-case basis or geographic basis is to see, are we on the right page? Did we think that through correctly?
Sure.
And, one of the things that I think kind of encourages us to be flexible with this information is just what you said, is that there may be a community perception that despite what we thought the route was that people walk, they really go on the next street. And we can, give that, change those rankings because we adjust how the connectors are, whatever. And sometimes we can jump down to tier 3 because it makes sense.
Yeah, to me, what's going to be most important are the major routes where there are no currently existing sidewalks, one side of the street first.
We really did try to give that a very high priority, but not going to say that with looking at every street that we had it right.
Well, last, I'm sorry?
Oh, no, I was just going to say that it's very tempting, I think, oftentimes to look at a database like this or anything that's been generated by a computer and say, this is the gospel and we have to go, in this manner. But we're trained planners. You're a trained planner, educated planner. So there is certainly a role for human judgment to enter into this. And that's why it is so important that folks on the council, folks on staff kind of keep their ears open to the community priorities as well. Because, we've said it probably 3 or 4 different ways, but this reflects one prioritization approach, but there are many different ways of doing it. You just mentioned something that's somewhat reflected in here, but is a different way of looking at it. So the way this information is presented now, it's very easy to do these calculations, to reorder this list, and it's also very easy because we have all of this. And a GIS, I should say, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a geographic information system. It's a database that has a map associated with it. So each little line on this map has a whole bunch of data indicating the existing conditions. If there's noncompliance, it describes the type of noncompliance, if there are obstacles, etc. So you can get a good sense before even going out, what you would find out in the field, and that can help staff make some determinations on which way they should go if they have 3 or 4 different projects that are put on their plate. They can look at those before sending crews out into the field. But I'm sorry to interrupt on that.
No, that's very helpful. The other thing I want to say, kind of along that lines, is I think a lot of the information that you've collected will also be really helpful to us in thinking about how different pots of funding might qualify for different elements of what it is. And I think that's one of the great things about the data that you've collected, is some of it will qualify for CDBG funding for the curbs and the ramps. Other stuff might qualify for more safe routes to school funding. Other things might qualify for speed camera dollars and other grants. I know that the planning office is always looking at grants that are available for sidewalk construction and have written some recently. I think it's all going to be, it's very useful. I'm glad that it's all in a GIS database that we can manipulate and change the parameters and ask questions of. It ought to be pretty nifty.
If I can just follow up on that for a second. My sense is, and tell me if I'm correct, that the argument laid out by Councilmember Clay could lead to a sense that maybe the waiting for the non-compliant ADA sidewalks is too high, given that it seems that those streets get the Tier 1 scores and the not having any sidewalks don't come as high, and so it would be possible to do something like change the weighting for the ADA compliance and then let that populate the database and say, now what does it look like? Okay, it's getting there, tweak it a little bit more, and then you're able to kind of look at it that way and say, now it gives us a much better tool, so we're not just pulling pieces from tiers, but it reflects kind of the common reality that people see.
Right. One of the things I think that's important on this is that depending on the goal for any particular project, whether it's the criteria for a funding source or WSSC's coming through a neighborhood and we need to see what needs to be fixed or whatever, that we can sort the information, we can look at a map and get the segments, we can look at cost implications or whatever, and for whichever mechanism makes the most sense, then come up with a recommendation. The next stage in that that's not reflected here is field work, because what we think is there and what they saw and their staff saw when they did the inspection may not be what it is next year, or we may go out there and say, these 4 trees, we really are not going to take these down. And so we're going to find another way to deal with it. And so then it might change the route, it may change the cost, and that's something that then we can plug in and we can have a discussion with you or whomever about, in a transparent way, about what makes sense about which segments to do.
I was just going to follow up on something Colleen said, which is that I've been involved in constructing a lot of these kinds of scales professionally, and what's usually useful to do is to have some kind of external validation. That is, as Colleen just indicated, a set of streets that should come up high, a set of streets that should come out low, a set of streets that come out in the middle, and that's how you jigger what are essentially arbitrary numbers to hit those, because you don't have any external criteria for setting these weights. It's all just made up, which is fine because this is a tool for us. So I think another round of exercise would be for staff to identify, as Colleen started to do for her ward, where kids walk and so on, a set of criteria for what should be the highest priority. And then you jigger the numbers so that you hit that.
Yeah, we did try to do that, but you're absolutely right that it needs...
It's a refinement process.
It's a refinement process, and your eyes are important on this as well.
Yeah.
But no, I think we drove the consultants crazy because each time we saw a map, but we know about this street, and that's not how we think it should go, or whatever. So we, and we have people with very strong opinions, with, experience with certain funding sources, and so we have had a certain view about picking those streets and saying, that doesn't look right, or, this is in the right category. But there's, how many segments do you have? A lot. There's lots of eyes needed on this, and we really appreciate
But this
any of your...
alignment process is a very iterative process.
That's correct.
And we'll
We'd like to do
continue
that with you.
Exactly, continue to refine it, because, of course, I noticed in my own ward the same kind of concerns that Colleen had about where the kids actually walk and where there are no sidewalks versus where there is a sidewalk, but maybe it's not perfect kind of thing.
Thank you, Mayor. I thank you both, and all three of you, for this material, this presentation. It's very impressive what you put together. We think back to where you were when you started, and we had nothing. And I think it's an impressive approach, a very professional approach. I thank you for that. And certainly from your presentations tonight, it doesn't sound like the staff has driven you crazy. No. Let me take a crack at it. There are just a couple, and again, looking in my ward and some of the other areas where I know, there are a couple of things that look puzzling to me, and I think it's maybe just the data points of what you were looking at. For example, on Geneva Avenue, there's a church and a daycare that creates a lot of pedestrian traffic, not just on Sundays, but throughout the week. And yet that gets that ends up as a Tier 2 or a Tier 3 street for sidewalks. And when I see the young children, the preschoolers that are walking in the street every day, I wonder if maybe we need to look at different data points for that. Sure. And the same with Oswego Avenue. I wonder if traffic and the type of traffic was considered in this, because our public works facilities at the end of Oswego Avenue, we have a lot of trash trucks and city vehicles going up and down that road. It's very narrow and has no sidewalk on either side, and yet that ends up as a Tier 3 street for sidewalks. And again, I think that's wrong. I think what you've done is great for a first crack at this, and again, like I say, starting with nothing to begin with and going out and doing this. I just think that before we actually end up with with any kind of what we would call a finalized, prioritized list used for actual funding, we might want another iteration of this. I'm sure you would be glad to hear that.
We would be glad to hear that. We did not include traffic or the type of road along which a sidewalk travels.
If I might, one of the things, they get to move on in their lives, but one of the things that they get to do is make sure that we're trained appropriately for using the data to be able to make the changes that we're talking about. So that's their final stage of their contract, is to do some training of some of our staff to make sure that they're able to adjust the standards or know how to, as we finish a street, get it off the list or identify what it, how that
I
works.
guess what I'm adding to that is that it's more than just changing the rankings that you have or the ratings that you have.
There are different elements.
But there might be other elements that we want to look at.
And one of the things that we'll discuss in that training is actually how to incorporate other elements that aren't currently anticipated. And there may be things that come up, with the next council. There may be a totally different set of priorities or set of issues that are trying to be addressed.
We hope it's not
I don't know how many are up for re-election.
And then the other thing is, and again, with what Councilmember Clay said, that Ritchie Avenue ends up as a Tier 2 street because it doesn't have sidewalks on one side. And again, it seems much more important to get the sidewalks on one side before we worry too much about the other side of the street. The other one that just popped out when I saw it was on the curb ramp projects at the corner of Sheridan and Hancock is a Tier 1 ramp. And I know there's a park at the end of Sheridan at the dead end, but I just wondered if, that's obviously because that's a dead end, if there was any factor, there was low pedestrian generators, and so even if there's no ramp there, I wonder if that was somehow factored in. I'm just curious how that
I think the proximity to the park itself, the park itself is a destination or a generator, so that would be something that would elevate its score relative to another intersection that might be just adjacent to single-family residential.
Right. That just looked like an anomaly to me, but
okay. Look at that.
Again, not a big issue, and I certainly don't want to offend anyone who lives on Sheridan, thinking that they're not a high priority. They are.
A couple of questions. One is, where does damaged sidewalks fall into? Is it part of the ADA score and could also be an obstruction or
It's part of
obstacle
the
score?
ADA score. So when we looked at a sidewalk, we looked at the general pavement condition, and we developed a rating of 1 to 5, 1 being smooth, 5 being heaves of, say, 3 inches or more, and there are vertical separation. So there's the pavement condition. There is cross slope. Is it more than 2% tilting one way or the other? We found there were a number of sidewalks that when they cross driveway aprons, the running slope for the driveway apron can be 8%, but if it turns into a cross slope, then it's excessive, and somebody in a wheelchair or has another mobility disability would have difficulty. So cross slope is another factor. Obstacles or pinch points is a third one. There needs to be 30 or 36-inch clear path for a wheelchair to go through. And if you have, I think there was a photograph in one of our existing conditions report of a telephone pole that's right in the middle of a...
Actually, right at the front of this, at the beginning of this presentation.
Yeah. So that's an obstacle. It also creates a pinch point. And I'm trying to think of what else we looked at. For sidewalks, curb ramps, it would be if there are a lot of elements of a curb ramp.
Yeah.
There's the landing at the top, then there's the ramp, there's if it needs to be flush with the pavement at the bottom and not dip in so you get puddling. The flares on each side have a tolerance that they need to meet, and there can't be obstacles, so.
Yeah, and there's also a preference in the ADA standards. It's not a requirement, but a preference for curb ramps pointing somebody directly across an intersection rather than what you frequently see, which is a curb ramp that points somebody directly into the intersection. For someone who is visually impaired, that can be very challenging because it's pointing them sort of to the other corner.
I was asking about damaged sidewalks. I mean, my ward, I will admit, is very fortunate to have a sidewalks on the vast majority of the streets, but there are some that have been there longer. Many are in very good shape, but there are some pockets where the sidewalks are very cracked, and I was just wondering how that factors in, which brings me sort of to my second question. I saw the number, if we built all the sidewalks we wanted, I think it was like, what? $41 million. My question, chump change. My question is, and it's connected to the repairing of the sidewalks we have, is like, what's the factor you use usually to figure out how much that means in ongoing costs per year? So if you invest $10 million in sidewalks, new sidewalks, and those sidewalks are then dilapidated, you're not going to tear them out. Residents would go nuts, and it would be probably bad policy. You're going to have to reinstall them or repair them or what have you. And so by making that upfront investment, the city is also committing to an annual investment to maintain, and putting that annual investment on top of having sidewalks that we already need to maintain and the fiscal situation we're in generally as a city. I'm sort of curious if there's some factor or number you guys have in your...
We can certainly check with our engineering folks back in the office. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but to echo what was said earlier by Suzanne, we frequently are not involved in the maintenance part. That's something that the municipality or our clients, that's sort of their ongoing part of their responsibilities. But we'll see what sort of information we have from other clients we've worked with.
Yeah, I mean, if you gave us if we had a rough number on how long an average sidewalk lasts, you can back into the calculation.
Yeah, we'll get that for you.
Okay. And then lastly has to do with state highways. So I noticed on the map the state highways are all gray. And did we just not include the information here because we don't have the authority or to change those or want to pay the money? But do we actually do the analysis on those?
State Highways has done an inventory and assessment of sidewalks and curb ramps. And they have that. They use it as an asset management tool. They have told us that when they repair a sidewalk, install a sidewalk, correct or install a curb ramp, it's in their database. So when we did our existing conditions, we included them in the count for the whole city, so you'd have a picture of the whole city. But in putting the recommendations together, we did not include them because they would be under the state's purview to do.
Well, I asked this because if we have the count, I wonder if we have like the score on each of those also, because it would be interesting to know if there's some sidewalks that actually, if they were repaired, or might be tier 1, they might be the highest priority, like the stretch on Piney Branch between Philadelphia and up towards the middle school. But so we would be able to go to the state highway and say, hey, listen, we're working on our sidewalks, but these 5 sidewalks are like highest priority for our community. We need you to fix them. And in other areas around the junction, which is a high traffic area, from sort of where we kind of finished the sidewalk improvement work over to the co-op is a nightmare. And I've had a couple residents who are ADA experts kind of complain about that area. And there's another situation where a telephone pole is smack dab in the sidewalk that I think is like maybe 4 feet across as in totality.
We do have the state's, I believe we have the state's inventory of their road system, and in this GIS database that we will be giving, not just be able, we will be giving to the city. We haven't gone through and gone through the whole scoring process with the state routes, and we can look and see. I think that should be fairly straightforward to do.
Some of their assessment was, I'm looking at our existing conditions that we provided in April, and I do have 5.8% of state-owned sidewalks were compliant. So we have that condition.
5.8%, that's it?
Yeah, we have that condition information in the database. It is not as detailed
Yeah.
as the work that we did.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be helpful for us to have our own perspective, because I do respect state highways in many ways, but lots and lots of the state highways are not in densely populated areas like this, ours, and we see frequently where they have a perspective which is sort of locked into a more suburban environment and have trouble kind of contemplating how those state highways work running through a more dense community.
And an accessible pathway needs to be accessible from where you start and where you end up.
Right.
So if there's a gap in that, it's not accessible.
Right.
So is it, did I hear you say it's possible to some extent integrate the state highway information into this?
We'll look into that. I think we can.
Because I think we would recognize that
Yeah.
it's more up to them to change based on
But it would
on
certainly
what they do.
support
But
your
if it's
petition.
in there, even if it's, a different color coding system or something, so that we can kind of try and track
It sounds
their
like it might be
changes.
hard to have an apples-to-apples comparison.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Assessment.
we did, in the existing conditions, we reported on them separately, but if when I go back and look at the existing conditions report, the detailed information on non-compliance issues was only for city-owned sidewalks and curb ramps.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? This is extremely valuable, and I like the flexibility going forward. And it sounds like you're setting us up so that the questions that we come up with in the future, we'll gradually have the ability to drive our own staff crazy with them.
We like to provide you with fish, but we also like to teach you how to fish. So,
Thanks very much.
you're welcome.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to the discussion of the resident survey. And then we still have discussions of the status of the Public Safety Committee and the City Manager's quarterly report and financial update. So, the resident survey.
Well, I'll start it, if I was going to start. We have discussion of the resident survey. 2 years ago, we used National Research Center to conduct a resident survey, and that information we found very useful. Okay. But one of the things that I really appreciated after the 2007 resident survey is that there were a number of comments that were made by members of the council, members of the public, or handwritten comments on the survey, which caused us to, in thinking of a new survey, looked at some of the word tweaking or some things that might help clarify the various issues. And what I have in the package is a comparison of the changes between the 2007 resident survey and the draft 2009 resident survey. And I can go through that in a few moments. One of the things that, and I see the chief is here, we found that when we did the resident survey in 2007, there were a number of pieces of information that we found very useful as staff. I know that I think each department met in a group to review the findings and think about were there pieces of information we needed to act on. There was fascinating code violations that nobody ever reported but were listed in there, a variety of things that we could actually act on. And I know the police department, because there was quite a lot of police questions, and there was an open-ended police question, had a lot of study of that. And Chief, do you want to say a little bit about how you used the survey?
Well, as you know, when I came in as the new police chief, the survey had just been completed, and I had the results. And along with meeting with various members of the council at that time and various citizens, the survey was probably the most extensive thing because it represented each ward in the city. It was, and if you look at the breakdown of the numbers, it's very equal. And it gave me a good picture of everything that was happening in the city, not just from one spot or who yells the loudest or what group has got representation. And it showed there were equal problems. What I went through is what I found very useful was some of the things it was saying, but the remarks were excellent. For me, I read every one of those remarks, and a lot of the stuff today we were able to implement over the last couple of years. I found it to be, there were several other surveys that have been done over the last couple of years. I found that to be the most accurate of what I thought from talking to people and after being here a while, what really was happening in our city and what we needed to do. And in one sense, some of the crime prevention programs and community policing programs we put up before, I put on the back burner because safety and how people felt and the perception of what was happening in our city was a very serious one when I got here, and it still is today. And I put my resources in what I thought were the things that would improve the quality of life based on my experiences over the last 40 years in law enforcement. I think it's worked fairly well. There's obviously a lot more to be done. But I found the survey to be one of the best tools I've ever had. I've never had a survey where I walked into a new city that I could look at. And the comments, if you go back and look at that report, there's just little things, but they really meant something to me because it was perceptions of what we were doing, how we answered the phone, things that you all, I know Bruce, that you've discussed with me, Terry, when you were here, Colleen, people that were already on the council discussed with me, really helped me reaffirm certain things, and I learned about some other areas that nobody had recognized, and it were small things, but I found this one of the best surveys I've ever seen done in all the municipalities I've worked in. It really helped me with law enforcement, and obviously there's a lot of questions in there for law enforcement, again, which will give me a report card on where we're at and where we need to go over the next couple of years.
I know one of the things, our communications division asked a number of questions and had some extra crosstabs run, which was very useful. You know, it's not useful to hear what people think of City TV if they don't have cable or other access to watching it, you know, and report that they don't ever look at that. So, you know, we can do a variety of things that are more specific, which has been helpful. One of the things, though, I do want to caution, and some of the council members have mentioned this, is that this is not a program evaluation tool. This is a perception survey. This is an opinion survey. It's very useful to us in customer service or in hearing, as you said, a lot of the specific comments is very useful to identify a particular problem with the street that we may not have ever known about, or a particular problem in some cases with a certain department that nobody had really complained about before. And those are things that we can use. It does not say that the CSAFE accomplished this reduction in crime or something like that. That is not what this kind of a tool does. We think of it, I think, more as a dashboard kind of reporting tool, where what happens is you see, oh, there's a problem in this area, we can focus on it, we can start looking into the programs that are associated with that area, but that's a separate kind of a study. The other thing I think about surveys is that having a resident survey is considered a best practice in a well-run city government. Recently, at the state, the General Assembly's, let's see, what's it called? The Joint Legislative Work Group to Study State, County, and Municipal Fiscal Relationships, the one that we couldn't get, municipalities couldn't sit in on. One of the questions was raised was how many municipalities do resident surveys to find out are they happy with municipal services and do they want services provided by municipalities. And so the MML reps who were attending the meeting sent out a listserv question to the City County Managers Association of Maryland to find out who does resident surveys, and we responded with a link to our survey. In Montgomery County, Rockville, and Gaithersburg also use NRC for their survey, and Montgomery County uses NRC for their survey. They did their first one after we did ours. I know they were a little disappointed that the residents weren't as satisfied with Montgomery County as they thought that they should be. So in one sense, I was, you take a little bit of glee in that. As you know, Baltimore County uses it because when you approved the contract with NRC a couple months ago, we piggybacked on Baltimore County's pricing. And so we have a good price for this survey. One additional piece of information that I want to mention before I go through some of the differences of the proposed survey is that one of the things that the survey does ask for is some demographic information, which is useful, languages spoken and that kind of thing. When the census forms come on April 1st, the questions will be very sparse. They will ask how many people live in your household. They will ask for each person the sex, the age, and the race of the people in your household. That's it. There's no long forms. There's no information on income, on transportation, languages spoken, any of that kind of thing. We will not have information for that for Tacoma Park. What happened is that they switched away from the long form to the American Community Survey System, which is an annual, very broad random survey across the country. And from what I can learn, that information will not be provided for places less than 65,000 population. So we're not going to get the kind of information we're used to getting about Tacoma Park. This, of course, is not as useful as the census information, but it does help us identify languages in Tacoma Park, some household income categories, ranges in Tacoma Park by area. And I think that that's something that will be something that we'll want to have a piece of information for our use. Again, it's not the census, but it is information that is to the boundaries of Tacoma Park. The other thing that's important about, and we're fortunate about this particular survey, is that we have an address base for just Tacoma Park residents. And I've been looking back through it to make sure that sometimes changes occur in this. But we not only have it by address, but whether the unit is a rental unit or an owner-occupied unit. And one of the things that NRC did last time was it oversampled rental units to try to get a representative sample that was balanced between owners and renters, more than is normally done. We're fortunate compared to other NRC jurisdictions because in other places they just use zip code lists and they take a multifamily unit and they say, okay, those must be renters, whether they're condos or whatever. And so we do have a very specific listing that NRC can use. Before I go through some of the details of the changes, are there other questions just about those things that I just talked about?
Councilmember Victoria.
Oh, Susan, I would caution against using this as a substitute for data we're not getting on the census because, in fact, my biggest concern is that I think this survey systematically underrepresents, even though you've made some good efforts, people with less education, people of color, people who have lower literacy skills, and probably renters. Even though they oversampled, only 31% of the responses actually came from renters. And it seems to me, while they did not weight on race, that the racial makeup of this was not very representative either.
I do think that they tried to weight after the fact based on race and some other categories, but I can double check, and that's something that we can find out more information.
I'd like to know if there were weights on race. They don't indicate that here. They say they weighted by ward, and again, good old wards 4, 5, and 6 were underrepresented and weighted up.
Yeah, I will
Whereas
double
most
check.
of the responses came from wards 1, 2, and 3. As a substantive addition, I would really like to see years of education on here. Occupation is hard to come by, and income is not always accurate. This is a town of lots of people with graduate degrees who live alternative lifestyles and don't make a lot of money, but that doesn't necessarily reflect
But years of
their
education
level.
is a good addition.
It's as good as we have. And at the same time that I'm adding a question, I note that there are 150, 160, 170. I mean, I have concerns that an 8-page questionnaire with this much detail is an overwhelming respondent burden, and that you're still losing people who simply are never going to fill this out and aren't going to write answers in open end. For example, it's very hard to get people from Latin cultures to fill in open ends.
Right, we got some, there was some translation for several, but I'm sure you're right on that.
But that's it, in general.
Okay.
Other general questions or comments?
Okay.
I had a question about the census. My concern, I guess I should disclose that I've been unenthusiastic about doing this survey. In fact, suggested that we not fund it during the budget process. I wonder if there's any concern that having the survey out there at the same time that people are going around and being asked to do the census, if that might be confusing or cause problems for the census.
I don't know, and I think that would be something that NRC staff could address. I'm sure they've had that in the past, but I'll follow up on that.
And will that affect their income? Will the answer to that question affect the income of the NRC staff? Or that's the census staff you're talking about?
No, I was going to, no. To me, I mean, I think, I certainly...
If you're asking our consultant, who's he?
Yeah, I can ask the consultant, but I can ask others as well. I understand that you're concerned about a conflict of interest on that. Right. We will double check on that.
I mean, it might be interesting to ask the census people what they feel about it, too.
Sure.
When are the census folks going out?
April. In March. It goes, April 1st is Census Day.
But are people working on prior stages before that?
Are they working?
Well, I'm just wondering about this supposed conflict if our survey is going to be back to us in December.
This survey should be back to us in early December. So there should be...
It doesn't seem like there's overlap.
It should have 3 months, a good clearance of 3 months.
So there's a good separation.
But I think it's still certainly something to pursue.
Sure. Councilmember Wright, did you have a question?
I'm also suspect about using this in place of census data. I understand they're using the long form for everybody, but they're also using sampling to get all of the detailed information about every part of the country. There's a huge political battle about this between the Democrats and the Republicans and the use of sampling. So the data is going to be there. I'm interested to hear that if you're not 60,000 or larger, you won't get the data.
Well, we won't get it as Tacoma Park, as a place of Tacoma Park. We'll get it incorporated in Montgomery County. There may be some ways to do agglomerations of zip codes.
I think for not a lot of money, I bet we'll be able to get the census data at zip code and the sub-block
we can get census data. It's the American Community Survey data that is done. Others can speak better to this than I, but in what I have read, the sampling is over such a large area, and that getting down to a specificity of a city of 18,000 is very difficult to...
Well, the census tracts are smaller. They're
right, that's for census. But for the American Community Survey, it doesn't come down to that.
No, the PSUs, the primary sampling units, are bigger. It's true. But you can... Anyway, we could talk about what you
I'm not at all substituting this for the census.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that it will be useful to see some of the information on language in particular that's important to Tacoma Park.
And it may be important information for the census folks. They may be interested in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we certainly talked
The
about them.
second question I have is, so this is going to cost 32,000 or something, right? Is that the number? What's the cost if we just, like, what have we already committed and how much would we save if we just said, no, we're not going to do it today?
The city's contract with NRC provided for a payment that we became obligated for, contract execution of approximately $19,000 to $20,000. That was the upfront payment for hard cost. We have incurred, obviously, lots of time with NRC staff trying to work up a draft of the survey to get to this point this evening. I have not received an invoice for their staff services, just looking at the budget and trying to do some rough ballpark calculations. My guess would be there's going to be $3,000 to $4,000 on top of that 20.
So max we would save 12 and probably minimum we might save 8 or 9.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Clay.
I think the maximum we would save would be about $5,000, because we have to pay them the contract for the hard costs, which I thought was like $21,000, plus the other money that they have already put forward. And I think we voted on this back in late July when I was not actually here, but I went back and looked it up, and we voted on it on a consent agenda, 6-0 to spend the money. So I think it's kind of late to go back and sort of double back on that decision. I mean, we're essentially talking about $5,000 for whether or not we now at this point execute the survey that all the work has been put into, and I think that question is passed.
No, I think you always should reassess when you're spending money, right? Like you have opportunities to vote again, but I think it's a very valid thing, and that's why I brought up the question. I wanted to get a sense of, because someone might be out there saying, oh, they're spending $32,000 on this. If we've already made a decision at a point at which the economy was bad, but the budget picture's gotten worse since then, we can't really, even if we wanted to go back, we can't go back. We're sort of committed and.
Right. Yeah, because we've essentially spent $26,000 of the $31,000 already.
So I just wanted to be clear on that.
Right, and we made two decisions to spend it. We kept it in the budget, and we voted the contract.
Yes.
Would you like me to go through the differences?
Briefly.
I will be brief. One of the things that I provided in the package was a cheat sheet comparing the 2000 survey to the 2009 survey. Almost all the same questions on the 2007 survey are in the 2009 survey. There were a few wording changes. A couple that I particularly liked changes were, for example, when people said, why did they like living in Tacoma Park? Many of them hand wrote in trees. Well, we added trees as one of the options, so you can just check it. So it was very useful to be able to look through the write-in replies as a way to judge whether we were asking the right questions. Similarly, there were 3 languages that I'm suggesting take off the language list because we got very few people who said they spoke Vietnamese or Korean. I forgot the other one. However, I think Farsi. I would have guessed that Haitian Creole and Tigrinya were important languages. I was a little bit surprised that German got written in as much as it did. And so we've added in German, Tigrinya, and Haitian Creole. We changed a number of the communications questions, and we are trying to focus on a question that would ask, how would people like to hear of information electronically? We have some examples that we currently use, the listservs, like the communicator that comes out of the police department and their notices. We have And we've had people say, gee, can you be on Facebook, can you do Twitter? So we're judging kind of what people think about a variety of different electronic communication preferences. We had 2 committees ask to have survey questions on the survey. The Washington Adventist Hospital Land Use Committee, they provided a whole lot of questions. In working with them and with NRC, we were able to narrow down kind of what they think is their most important thing that they want to know, and that is what do residents wish to see on the hospital site once the hospital moves off of it? And so there's some ways to gauge preferences on that, and with an open-ended question about that. Similarly, the Emergency Preparedness Committee is very anxious to find out if people are prepared for, stay home 3 days, do you have your water, food, prescriptions in your home? And then they wanted to know, did you find out from them or from other sources? And so that was part of what they have asked. As I was looking at it, there may be a little tweaking that needs, but that is something that they have requested. One of the things that we feel might be a very useful series of questions is the policy question. And the policy question on the 2009 survey, it's numbers 31, 32, 33 on page 6, so almost at the back of the package. And this is based on the current downturn in the economy, the city may need to either raise taxes or reduce services. Which option best indicates your preference? And if the city were to have to reduce services, would you support or oppose reducing services in each of a variety of services that we provide? And then we ask, what do you think is one service that the city of Tacoma Park can afford to cut entirely or substantially reduce? Given that we're about to go into the FY 2011 budget process, it seemed that this would be a very useful time period to find out if there's certain areas that people feel very strongly about keeping, less strongly about keeping at the level of service that we have now, or if there's willingness to raise taxes to pay for current services. Recognizing that that's the council's judgment, this is something that would help inform from across the city people's positions on that. There's also, as there was in the last survey, just kind of, do you have any other comments you'd like to make? So if somebody wants to make more, there's plenty of room for that in the survey. Let's see. And then just one other demographic question had to do with phone service, because this is like reverse 911, primarily relies on landlines to call in a geographic area. Many people don't rely heavily on a landline, or they're going to the voice over internet, or they prefer to use their cell phone and get text messages on their cell phones. One of the things that we wanted to find out is if, what people use and what their preferences are. It may not change anything we do right away, but it is some information that would be useful. And the staff at NRC were particularly interested in adding this because it's important to them as surveyors, too, to develop some standard-based questions so as they use these same questions in other communities that they start to get a comparison. One of the things that we mentioned in the 2007 survey that I do want to mention is that NRC not only does individual surveys for cities like Rockville and had done in Tacoma Park, but it has the National Citizen Survey, which is a base survey, kind of a low-budget base survey that that communities can buy into, so that many of the base questions, that there's a very large number of communities on which the base questions can be compared.
I'll make a note myself to check on this, but the term landline is not commonly understood by people.
Okay, and any help on that? Please do. Please do.
That's
frankly
inside baseball, and there are national health studies that are really leading the way on this.
Okay.
For question 32, I didn't wait to be recognized by Bruce. I'm just going wild in my last half hour here. On reducing services, I think it's an interesting addition. I just wonder, the reality is that D, reduced number of police officers, is one item for 65% of the budget. And I mean, not that we're going to take people's advice on things here, but if you say, get rid of Halloween and touch a truck, that saves us what? 1/10%?
Yeah, I mean, I think Suzanne and I spent a lot of time talking to some of the department heads about what to include, and certainly I think we're looking for the council's guidance. I think what we did not want to assume is that there were any sacred cows, quite frankly, going into this process. I would add, I don't necessarily see this as being the end-all and the be-all in terms of decision-making, but I think it would be helpful at least to try to get some community feedback about different service areas and use that as sort of a springboard for further conversations with the community.
Part of the reason
we've covered all the areas?
I don't know that we have, but one of the things just on the variety of recreation items is that there was a sense that sometimes when people hear recreation services or recreation programs, they're thinking one particular thing and not the different kinds of varieties of things that they're doing. So this was a way to kind of put them into groups.
Right. And I guess one last thing would be, oh, God, never mind. I was going to see if you wanted to ask a question about Public Works. I mean, that's the biggest spending.
Well, we do say level of street maintenance.
But
nowhere here.
Facility.
Oh, okay.
I think this is one of those type of issues, and we went through this a little bit with the gymnasium question 2 years ago. I think it's a difficult question to answer. It doesn't really lend itself to a survey because there's a variety of complexity. I know Councilmember Wright had asked a question, and I think it was several meetings ago, that I do think warrants some discussion when the new council is seated, which has to do with, are there certain public works services that we could handle in a different way, and would that impact what is needed with the facility renovation? And Public Works Director and I have talked about that, and I think that's an issue for the council to revisit. Truthfully, the very clear line of discussion from my perspective is to talk about sanitation services. There's obviously a number of options of how to handle that. It's not that would impact the actual cost of the facility in terms of there's a whole new building, basically. It also has a significant impact in terms of the capital investment that the city makes in terms of sanitation trucks. For those of you who were here the last time we bought either a sanitation truck or a recycling truck, you're talking in the 6 digits. So I do think it's an area worth exploring. I'm just not sure the survey is not a little too simplistic to deal with an issue of that complexity.
We also found with the gym question that just the whole issue of bonding and whatever is really hard to convey in a survey format.
Councilmember Robinson, then Councilmember Clay.
I'm going to focus on the policy questions, too. I'm thinking that question 31 is really trying to address maintaining the level of services and raising taxes, or reducing the level of services and keeping the taxes the same, or reducing the levels of services and lowering taxes. I guess you could also have a fourth one, increase the level of services and raise taxes. And so those are the those are the 4 things. And I think that phrasing it in that way might be clearer to people. If you're offering them those choices, just offer the choices. The way you have it now, I think it's kind of complicated. I'll repeat it. Maintain the level of services and raise taxes. Reduce the level of services and keep taxes the same. Or reduce the level of taxes, reduce the level of services and lower taxes. Now, it's implied there that if you reduce the level of services and lower taxes, that services will go down even further.
I'm not sure people will pick up that distinction, though.
Well, maybe there's a way to get that across in such a question. Now, maybe that's not an appropriate way to do it, but it made more sense to me thinking about it that way than the four options you have. Strongly support increasing taxes to maintain existing levels of service. There was a lot of information coming at me on that one, and the same with the last one. Strongly support reducing levels of services and not raising taxes. It was just
I
kind of too
appreciate
much
that.
information.
I will say, Barb, I think we have, a 20-page document of different ways to ask this question.
Yeah.
Let's
Okay.
go back and see if there's
Sure.
something that's similar to that, because I appreciate that.
Okay, and then in the A through P section, it struck me that everything says reduce.
Except the recreation.
Except recreation, which doesn't say
It
reduce.
should have been in there.
Okay, and I would
take it out.
And thinking
Or
of-
just take reduce up the top, yeah.
Because you have once.
And in
It would
fact-
start to confuse me a bit, so reducing.
And in fact, I would not say reduce at all. I would list all of these elements, and then on the right have three options: more, same, less, maybe four, and don't know. In other words, are you content with the level of street maintenance? How do you evaluate the levels of the following items? Street maintenance, I want more. I want same. I want less. Don't know. So what that does is lets people directly evaluate how much of each service they're getting. The way it's phrased now, again, it's kind
You're
of
not going
complicated.
up on any of these, but.
Pardon?
Right, the way that this,
More.
nothing goes up.
Yeah,
It
I
only
mean, if
goes down.
we're, in a sense, we're offering them a kind of a matrix. How do you view all the things that we offer to you? Do you wish we had more of this and less of that? Now, it would be nice if it became a zero-sum or some kind of game that was related to the answer to the question up above, but there's no way to do that in the two questions in a simple survey like this. But I do think, and maybe my colleagues don't agree, or maybe the rest of us don't agree, that giving people the opportunity to say, this is an appropriate amount, or I wish I had more of this, or I could live with less of this, for each of our departments, I think that would give us a lot to go on.
Yeah, that's a slightly different question than this one is. And
I
so
understand.
this question is, if we have to reduce services, where would you cut? Not if,
I
of
agree.
these various services, do you want more, the same, or less?
But I
think that's a council question about,
Right.
from all of you, about what you would prefer to have in terms of information.
There was another question, as I recall, and we can share that with the council, which I think had like, you have $1 to divvy up or
Yeah.
something along those lines. Okay. We didn't pick it, can't remember, Victoria, but.
People can't do fractions.
Yeah.
Would you rather
Well,
spend
that's what
$1
she said,
to
that
do-
people add up to 110, it gets all confused, it gets.
Yeah, I mean, I think the underlying premise of why we probably gravitated towards the format of question 32 was, at least in my opinion, I think we're entering a period of having to restructure how we provide services, and I think we were really trying to get at what is the tolerance level for reducing services in certain areas. Admittedly, I think our assumption wasn't that we would be, you could certainly switch things off, but that there was going to be a need for the city to increase its overall level of expenditures, and trying to see where that tipping point was for people in different areas.
Well, maybe that's the right approach.
First, I want to say that I want to know the answer to these policy questions, and I think of all the ways that you could ask this in this format, I think you picked a good way to ask it. It's not the way I would go about getting the information, but if this was the tool that you had, this is a good one. So while I'm still on that, I want to make some comments on a couple of suggestions that the other folks have made. Just want to make sure that when you're changing it, that it actually doesn't become more confusing. I, in general, support Ruben's idea about removing the word reduce so you don't repeat it over and over again.
But it's kind of useful when you're reading down.
Well, as the question reads now, to what extent would you support or oppose reducing each of the following services? I guess if you're going to take it out of here, I would put it in bold in the question so that they remember that, so it's I strongly support reducing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is, if we were doing it just right above the list, it would be reduce in bold letters, reduce, and then with, like, you know, 3
Yeah,
dots.
Josh says
and then-
he would repeat it, but, or you could change
I like
the...
it repeating, but.
You could
this-
change
it
the
gets
5
straight.
things, or 4 of them, so it says strongly support reducing, and then it says level of, or support reducing, or oppose reducing.
That's true.
So you could put it in the top of those, and those would help me. When I fill out these surveys, frequently, when there's, like, I don't know, 12 questions or whatever it is, every time I do a new one, I go back and read it, so I remind myself again whether this is the, you know, I'm saying yes, yes, or no, no. So I want to say that I think in general that this is the best way to do it. But the problem that I have with this is that I think we're asking people to answer a question when they don't have the full picture of information. And it's the same objection that I had to the Omni Design Group, that the Adventist Hospital. Dynamis, thank you. The first incarnation was Omni. But so Dynamis goes and says, hey, we have this vacant piece of land. What would you like to see on it? And people are like, oh, well, you know, I want a nonprofit village, and I want a supermarket, and, you know, all these kinds of things. And there's no relationship to what people would have to put into that, or the fact that a nonprofit village generates no tax base. So we would have to pay to service it with police services and you know, all the other things that we do, and we would get no tax money for doing that. And so it's like taking a kid into the candy shop and kind of, you know, they don't know like what things cost, and the same thing is true here. So somebody might say, you know, I would really, I could care less about the park and garden maintenance or something where the percentage that we get as a rebate from the county is relatively high versus things for which we don't get any rebate or hardly any rebate, or things for which there's some operational income, like some of the, I don't see affordable housing on here,
Cable
but
TV,
recreation.
you get a lot of money for
Cable
that.
TV, exactly. So I'm a little bit concerned that we're opening up kind of a can of worms where we're asking people a question, and they're going to answer it, and it's going to say, we should eliminate probably city planning services, since people have the least interact. So 70% of the people say we're going to eliminate city planning services, and then they come back to us and, well, we told you what to kill, like, why didn't you kill it? And there are all these other peripheral reasons why we don't do that, for example. So I'd rather do that question in a focus group. It's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I just had a flashback to what I consider to be the worst council meeting I ever sat through.
And we all know what one you're talking about.
That was the design a speed bump council meeting, where we had a cross-section of a speed bump on the table, and council members were deciding how many inches it should be when you're 1 foot in from the edge. I mean, it was crazy.
I didn't get to go to that one.
You missed
man.
I think I still have the video of that because it was a keeper. Anyways, I think we hired...
resulted in those Maple Avenue speed bumps that nobody wanted.
That's right. And you can see the product of the council's work on Maple Avenue between Philadelphia and the city line. But, you know, I thought we contracted with an organization that supposedly knows how to design surveys, so I'm really concerned when I hear council members trying to pick out the wording. I think we should be dealing at a level, and I'm certainly not criticizing my colleagues for that.
Well, one of the Terry, I mean, I think one of the things that we would like to do is, it's important for us to hear from you about, you know, should these questions be in here? If
Right.
there's something that's really wrong, whatever, there's a variety of ways that can be done in a good way. In any event, we'll need to run it back, the wording back past National Research Center.
My humor probably comes across wrong at 11 o'clock at night, but I just think that, you know, the question is whether we have the right questions in here. And I just don't have the spirit to go through this whole thing and craft the questions.
And I'll remind my colleagues that it's now 11:01, and 11 o'clock is the witching hour when our discussion deteriorates and our decisions get worse.
I think I would say, I think we're not asking you to wordsmith or to tweak. We're just trying to get a general sense. I mean, a lot of this is boilerplate that carries over from the 2007 survey for comparative purposes. I think the major things that I think we have struggled with as a staff was what Councilmember Victoria alluded to, is wanting to use a survey and get a whole lot of data and being concerned about creating almost survey fatigue on the part of the respondents. I think if there are things in here that, obviously we had some committees who wanted to add some questions, that certainly took up some space. I think if they want to get feedback, this is a good tool to do that, but if there's things that you just really don't feel you want to know the answers to, or you feel are irrelevant or unnecessary, that feedback would be helpful. Otherwise, I think we're comfortable as a staff working with NRC and trying to kind of get this to completion, but I would have been uncomfortable truthfully moving forward without at least having you all have the chance to see it.
Besides my earlier comment about taking reduce out, I think on the Washington Adventist Hospital question, 29, I would change the wording slightly. Washington Adventist Hospital intends to move out of Tacoma Park. I don't think the new location north adds anything really significant.
Well, and it suggests it could be just north of, and it's way the heck north of.
Yeah.
Would be my official description of what it's going.
And in fact, on that also, I had thought that the next sentence, hospital officials have stated that they intend to retain ownership of the Tacoma Park property. I just thought that would help.
That would also help, yeah. And, it's a long, they've stated that they intend, just hospital officials will retain ownership of the property, or something shorter than.
Right now, you're going through the certificate of need process. It's really hard for us to say something that's
Yes, okay, well,
I appreciate it.
That's
we
it.
really wanted definite stuff, and this one just...
We deliberately went kind of on the wussy front on that.
I will show one.
Here.
I have been involved in many survey drafting activities in my career, and my personal and favorite comment, which I will share, is I've been on this interagency working group for the current population survey, which is used by the Bureau of Labor Statistics to gather unemployment. And they substantially fund that part of it, okay? And the guy essentially said, when we had suggestions for changes, he said, you can change anything you want as long as it remains exactly the same.
So there you go.
That was really good.
Sounds like that's from the Department of Redundancy Department.
Yes, that's right.
Councilmember Wright, and then we're going to wrap this up.
Yes, I have to just quickly disagree with you, Terry. I think this is a great meeting because Roger Schlegel is here in the audience, and he gets to see exactly what he wants to get into.
Yes, agree with that.
Correction, Roger Schlegel is the audience.
Come on, reporters count.
Reporters do count.
Hey.
I think we're saving him from the football game, right?
No, it's 27-10, they're losing.
Oh, Lord. Okay. Do you need anything else on this item?
No, I guess I would just ask if anything strikes you in the next few days, please, send me an email letting me know. Obviously, one of the things we're really interested in is the policy questions 31, 32. If there's any things that you'd like to get community feedback on, possible service reductions, please let us know that. We'll work with NRC to craft a question. The plan right now is probably to try to get the survey out later this month. Under that schedule, I'm sorry, in November. I think, what month is it? And that would probably put us in a position to have the survey results back sometime in January, which I think would be a very good thing for the new council to be able to review with staff and with NRC and see what we do with the data from that point going forward.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to our next to last item. Discussion of the status of the Public Safety Citizens Advisory Committee. We had public comments earlier this evening from the former chair and a member of the committee that they agreed with the sense that it would be good to get a refined mission discussion for possible continuation of the PSCAC, and that putting it on hiatus for a period of time would be good. I had originally suggested that some kind of discussion of that could take place in January. They said they suggested a 6-month hiatus was good. Anybody got any opinions on a time frame? And then we could, or anybody got any disagreement with going forward with putting that on hiatus and having that discussion about what that mission should be? Councilmember Siemens.
I certainly think we need to put it on hold until we decide what it is we would want a group to do. I have, after reflecting on this over the past week, and feel stronger that that we don't need to have a sitting body, but that we should form, should we have a desire for recommendations from the community, that we should form a task force similar to what we do with the Environmental Action Task Force. I don't know that we're going to need policy recommendations, month after month, constantly. So I think it would be better to group things up, form a task force, and ask for volunteers to come back with specific recommendations on specific topics. And so that said, I think it would be good in the near term, like January, for the council at least to discuss if we have some requests that we would like to make of a body, and then if in fact the task force will be the approach to use. And I can think of one right now that, there's a new international standard for the use of tasers. Maybe that's something that the council would want, to see if there's any, if that creates any policy opportunities for us.
Other comments? Councilmember Clay and then Councilmember Robinson.
I think we should suspend it indefinitely, but I'll take 6 months if that's what we can get.
Councilmember Robinson.
Yeah, I'm all for suspending it. The way we did the task force on environmental quality was to link it to our strategic plan. And I think that that's our guiding document right now, so we should use that as a model. And I agree with Councilmember Siemens that creating a task force or a think tank or something to get clear on it is a good idea. And I think that maybe as we change our strategic plan, we ought to keep that in mind.
Other comments? Councilmember Smith.
Same here. I support ditto for Dan, what Dan said. In other words, suspend it for a while and then use the task force.
Councilmember Wright.
So I've thought about this a lot, and I was a few weeks ago coming with the perspective I thought we should continue the committee. But I've changed my perspective over the last few weeks, and some of it has to do with a pragmatic aspect. The first is that for committees to function well, council members have to take an active role, and it takes effort to recruit a good number of members to make it work effectively. And I think based on what we have on our plate right now and the priority of what the committee might potentially work on not being urgent, it doesn't seem like it's a good use of our effort as council members to be recruiting members for the committee aggressively. That's compounded by the fact that it sounds like a number of the members would actually prefer to be on the chief's advisory council, and it's his decision about whether they join that body or not. And I know he doesn't want it to be too large, but wants it to be representative. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is I feel very much that we would need to give the committee clear direction, and I don't think we're ready at a point to give them clear direction or have any burning issue that we want policy advice on. But we may in 6 months, or we may in 2 months from now, and at that point I like the idea more of charging a task force to look at a specific issue or two which could be made up of many of the members that are on the committee now, to come forward and help us with that. So that's how my perspective changed. I do think that there are going to be times when we're going to want an independent opinion from the police department on an issue. That's no disrespect to the chief. I have the greatest deal of respect for him. But I think there may be times where we want that, and then we can use a task force approach to deal with that issue. Thank you.
So it sounds, I'll venture forth and say, it sounds like people would like to suspend it for 6 months and have a conversation before the 6 months up as about next direction to take with that, and notify existing members and applicants that that's the case, and stay tuned.
I don't know, it sounds like maybe even suspend indefinite with council members to lobby the mayor.
Well, all I was looking for was something so that the mayor all of a sudden doesn't find out that people are saying, well, why haven't we talked about that? I was trying to peg it somewhere on the calendar. Okay.
I'm in favor of what Colleen said. I'd prefer getting rid of it indefinitely until there's a need.
Councilmember Clay.
Yeah, I think that we should constitute a task force if that's what we want. And,
right.
And I think that there's 4 of us who would prefer that approach at this point.
And so we don't?
No commitment, no recommitment to the SCAC.
I wasn't taking any recommitment to the PSCAC. I was just trying to schedule a discussion.
Oh, okay.
Well, I don't think we need to have the discussion until we decide there's an issue that we need to have a task force for. But back to I would hate to send a message out to people who have signed up for the committee that they now have to wait for 6 months until we make some other kind of a decision. And it comes back to the commentary that I made when we first talked about this, is about how you treat your volunteers, which I think is a core element of this, is that, if we're going to have volunteers, we have to have meaningful work for them. We have to spend time listening to them. We have to care about what it is they have to say, and I just don't want to, I would rather just let the Safety Advisory Committee go, let the chief's things take off. If we ever needed to come back to it again, we have the structure, but I don't want to leave, I know there's a Ward 2 person on it and one who's not reapplying. I don't want to leave those people on the line thinking maybe in 6 months we might have another Public Safety Citizens Advisory Committee. I'd rather redirect them to other committees that we have, that we need people to do work on, and hopefully, we'll look at the issue of livability, and we'll look at the accountability issue as well, kind of depending on how we get off the ground with the sustainability piece, but I just let it go.
I'm perfectly fine with that.
I would agree.
It's incumbent upon council members to suggest some discussion in the future. Councilmember Wright and Councilmember Seaman.
I was going to say someone could make the argument that the committee could be actively looking at issues and recommending them to us that we should look at. I have found in my time on the council that I get that from my residents fully anyway. So that, no, in a good way, that a resident will say, I think we should think about surveillance cameras, right? And so if we're going to have that as a policy discussion, or someone will bring up something about tasers or the use of the police scanner. I mean, the use of the police scanners, the license plate scanners, was raised to me not by members of the committee, but mainly by Thomas Nephew, who cares a great deal about civil liberties. And I have a lot of residents in my ward who care a lot about civil liberties. So I have no doubt that if people have concerns, they'll be brought up, and then we can surface them. And I'm sure all of you have the same thing. We can surface them and decide that we're going to assign a task force to look at them.
Councilmember Seaman.
Well, since Councilmember Clay and Wright have basically said what I was thinking, I'll be very brief and just say I agree that we should dissolve the Public Safety Committee. We should let the people who have expressed an interest in joining the committee know that we're going to use a different approach, tell them what the other volunteer opportunities are right now, including the Chiefs Committee, and also encourage them to to contribute to what we might want to look at from a policy perspective for public safety in the future. And when we receive those, if we do, then we'll know when we need to have another discussion and talk about forming a task force.
That's fine. We'll put something together that formally does that.
So that would be, so are you suggesting that I prepare a code amendment that removes the PSCAC from the code?
Yes, that sounds like that's the council's intent. And that would come forward in late November, at the earliest.
That could be on a consent agenda.
Okay. Any other comment on that? Then we'll go to the last item on the agenda, which is the city manager's quarterly report and financial update.
Chief, you may not want to miss this.
Yeah, city manager.
You're all through this, Dave.
You're going to read every point, right?
Yeah, I'm sure you all just want to stay here all night long.
I don't want to stay past midnight, personally.
I was going to try to do it in less than 5 minutes, Councilmember Robinson.
Yes.
Yes, and for our fine reporter. No, I think obviously the part of this report is just sort of a recap of staff activities during the last quarter. Certainly be happy to answer any questions you have about those, most of which I think you're probably already aware of. In terms of the financial report, a lot of this mirrors, I think, what the council already knows and what we discussed when we did Budget Amendment 1. Certainly, what we are seeing is declines in a number of revenue sources because of the state budget cuts. That would include highway user revenues, police protection revenues. Investment revenues are way down. That was something we talked about during the budget process for this fiscal year. So I don't think there's anything in the financial report that the council probably hasn't heard before and wasn't expecting. The one area I do want to flag for you all that we will, Yvonne and I have talked a lot about and we're going to continue to watch is income taxes. You may or may not recall from the budget process, we were expecting income taxes to stay flat between 09 and 10. Since the audit will be presented in the latter part of November, we did not meet our projection for fiscal 09, which I think is most likely an indication of two things. One is just the overall downturn in the economy and the rate of unemployment, and certainly Tacoma Park residents are likely not immune from that. The other thing that we assume is with the stock market decline, a lot of folks took huge hits on their investment earnings. And basically that factors into what they pay income taxes on. So that is an area of potential concern, I think, for this fiscal year because we didn't match projections for last year and we were expecting things to stay flat. That trend is something that Yvonne and I are going to just continue to watch and keep you apprised of. But I think it's possible that that may be maybe an area that's problematic this fiscal year. So, less than 5 minutes.
I think that's less than 3.
Wow.
I aim to please.
Councilmember Reagan, question.
I just had one question, which is, are we seeing any increase in default on the payment of property taxes due to like foreclosure fees going up or increased foreclosures or anything like that? Not for on house property taxes.
So far, we have not seen that. When you get the comprehensive annual financial report, one of the things that we track in the statistical section is the collection rate on property taxes. We didn't notice anything as of the end of last fiscal year, but certainly I think folks are still continuing to struggle. We'll have a better indication, I think, when the first payment of property taxes really comes in, which is about in the next 30, 60 days. But I can certainly talk to the housing department and see if they have any more recent information on foreclosures.
Any other questions? Then we're adjourned.
Please.